Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're drifting off to the damp, misty coastline of medieval Brittany. Picture this, you're not walking down a cobbled street in some generic European town, no. You're in a timber-framed house smelling of damp wool, wood smoke, and yesterday's fish stew. The year is somewhere around 1380, give or take a plague outbreak. And sitting heavily at the foot of a lumpy straw mattress is an object of profound female power disguised as boring domestic furniture, a widow's independence chest. You'd probably last 5 minutes here before complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi or succumbing to a suspiciously itchy rash. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where's your own cozy nook tonight? Drop your location and local time below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air hangs thick, cool, and salty here in a Breton fishing village. Think less Instagrammable seaside charm, more mud, seagull shrieks, and the ever-present tang of rotting seaweed and drying cod. You hear the rhythmic scrape of a woman carding wool by the hearth's feeble glow. Her name doesn't matter for now. What matters is the hefty, iron-bound oak chest squatting near her. It's not fancy. No intricate carvings of unicorns here, just sturdy joinery and blackened straps. It looks like it could survive a siege, or at least several decades of damp and determined children. This chest is her future, locked away under layers of scratchy linen and practical woolens. Forget knights and dragons. Real medieval suspense is wondering if your husband will kick the bucket before his mother tries to snatch your only good cooking pot. Historians generally agree Breton widows had more legal rights than many contemporaries, a mainstream fact often buried under tales of kings and battles. This autonomy stemmed from ancient Celtic customs stubbornly clinging on in France's rugged northwest peninsula. But here's the quirky tidbit, the key to this chest? It wasn't always metal. Sometimes, it was just a specific, memorized sequence of taps and pushes on seemingly solid wood panels. A tactile password known only to the wife. Imagine trying that while fending off a pushy brother-in-law demanding the return of family property. And scholars still argue fiercely whether these chests truly empowered women or were just elaborate cages, ensuring widows didn't become burdens on the parish by giving them just enough stuff to scrape by, but never enough to truly thrive independently. Was it liberation, or clever social control disguised as charity? You lean closer to the chest. Feel the rough grain under your fingertips. Smell the faint, lingering scent of the herbs packed within to deter moths and mice. Rosemary, lavender, maybe some pungent tansy. It smells like a slightly medicinal potpourri, fighting a losing battle against the pervasive damp. Hear the muffled thud as the woman shifts a heavy woolen blanket inside, rearranging her security. Outside, the wind whines off the Atlantic, rattling the shutters. It's a sound that hasn't changed in centuries. Someone coughs wetly in the next room. Medieval life, you quickly realize, was a constant, low-grade struggle against cold, damp, hunger, and germs modern medicine would swat aside like a gnat. Surviving childbirth was a lottery win. Dodging the plague felt like cheating fate. That chest represented control in a world offering women precious little of it. Its very weight was a promise. You will not be left with nothing. The flickering rushlight casts long, dancing shadows. It's not cozy, it's just dim. You notice the careful patching on the woman's sleeve, the callus on her hands. Every item in that chest was earned, bartered, or painstakingly made, a tangible history of labor and foresight. It wasn't treasure in the pirate sense, unless you treasure the ability to not freeze or starve. Think of it as the world's most depressing, yet vitally important, hope chest. It held no love letters, probably, just inventories and scratchy underwear. Practicality was the only romance on offer. Forget finding Prince Charming. The real goal was securing enough warm socks and a valid land deed to avoid begging on the church steps if your husband decided to take the medieval equivalent of a permanent dirt nap. The weight of that oak box held the crushing weight of fragile futures. Section 2. You're still in that dim, smoky room, the weight of the oak chest a silent presence. But to really understand its power, you need to step outside the cramped cottage. Picture the damp Breton air clinging to your skin as you look around. Brittany wasn't just another patch of medieval France. It felt distinct, almost stubbornly separate. Think less obedient province, more fiercely independent cousin who showed up to family gatherings with their own set of house rules. This wasn't mere local pride, it was codified difference, and that difference is the bedrock beneath our widow's chest. While much of France groaned under the tightening grip of royal Parisian law, a system where women often saw their property rights shrink faster than cheap wool in boiling water, Brittany clung fiercely to its ancient coutumes, its local customs. These weren't quaint folk traditions, they were legally binding, deeply ingrained practices that had evolved over centuries, shaped more by Celtic and pre-feudal roots than by the distant king's decrees. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this: Brittany's unique legal autonomy. While royal French law, influenced heavily by Roman traditions filtered through church interpretations, increasingly pushed married women into a subordinate legal status where their property effectively belonged to their husbands, Breton customary law often painted a different picture. It recognized women, particularly widows, as capable legal entities in their own right. This autonomy wasn't just granted, it was fiercely defended. Breton nobles and towns frequently resisted royal encroachment, arguing for the preservation of their ancient privileges. It was a constant, low-level tug-of-war between central authority and regional identity, a tension you could practically taste in the salty air. Now, here's a quirky, almost bureaucratic, tidbit that highlights this autonomy: the droit de quintaine. Forget jousting nights, this was a post-wedding ritual. After a marriage, the new husband was sometimes required to demonstrate his worthiness to manage his wife's inherited property by hitting a target with a lance while riding past. Seriously, if he failed spectacularly, it could theoretically cast doubt on his competence, potentially impacting his control over her assets. It was a bizarre blend of martial skill test, public shaming opportunity, and legal safeguard, a peculiar Breton twist on ensuring husbands weren't complete fools. Historians chuckle over its practical enforcement. Was it ever really used to strip a bumbling groom of property rights? Probably not often, but its existence speaks volumes about the distinct legal culture. And this distinctiveness directly fed into the widow's chest. Because Breton customary law often granted widows a specific, protected portion of the couple's joint property, her dower rights were typically stronger and clearer here than in regions directly under Parisian sway. This wasn't just about sentiment. It was cold, hard economic security. The law often stipulated that the widow had a right to a share, sometimes up to half, of the marital assets, specifically to prevent her from being left destitute and becoming a burden on her children or the community. The chest, therefore, wasn't just a box of stuff. It was the physical manifestation of these legal protections, a tangible guarantee recognized by the community and, crucially, by the local courts. It held the proof of her entitlement. But scholars still argue intensely about the source of this relative autonomy. Was it a direct, unbroken legacy from ancient Celtic societies, where women like the legendary Boudica held power and property? Or was it a more pragmatic development, forged in Brittany's unique geopolitical position as a contested borderland, where keeping the local population, including its women, relatively content and economically stable was essential for defense against both French and English ambitions? Some point to powerful historical Breton duchesses, like Anne of Brittany, who became Queen of France twice, as evidence of a culture more accepting of female agency. Others counter that these were exceptional political marriages, not proof of widespread female empowerment. Was the widow's chest a genuine Celtic inheritance, or a practical Breton solution to a universal medieval problem? The fog of history, much like the sea mist rolling in off the Atlantic, obscures a definitive answer. You feel the chill of that mist now, seeping through the cracks in the cottage wall, a reminder of the constant, damp reality. The woman by the hearth isn't just sitting near a box, she's sitting beside a small fortress built by law and custom. The rhythmic scrape of her carding wool is the sound of quiet preparation, a daily investment in the security that chest represents. Outside, the village operates under rules subtly different from those in Tours or Rouen. The local lord's bailiff collects taxes, but when it comes to inheritance disputes, he often consults the village elders about the old ways before glancing at any royal edict. The chest's significance is woven into the very fabric of Breton life, understood by everyone. Its iron bands are as much legal bindings as they are physical ones, holding together her claim to a future. You hear the distant toll of a church bell, a sound marking time but also community. The chest's promise is communal knowledge. Neighbors knew what it meant when a new one was built before a wedding. They'd have witnessed the slow accumulation of goods, a length of linen bartered for here, a better cooking pot acquired there. Its contents were semi-public currency in the economy of village respect. A well-stocked chest signified a prudent woman, a family of means, however modest, and a household adhering to the protective structures of Breton custom. Its weight wasn't just physical, it was social ballast. To challenge its contents was to challenge the village's understanding of fairness and the law that underpinned it. That oak box, smelling faintly of herbs and wool, was a silent but potent argument against dispossession. Its very existence whispered, "Here, things are done differently." Section 3. That sturdy chest by the hearth doesn't just magically appear. Its existence, its very purpose, is hammered out long before the wedding feast's last stale crust is tossed to the dogs. You're shifting scenes now, from the dim cottage to the slightly less dim, smoke-filled main room of the bride's family home. The air is thick with negotiation, not romance. Forget rose petals, think ink stains and the sharp scent of anxiety sweat. This is contract territory. Before a single linen sheet is folded into the waiting oak box, before the carpenter drives the last nail, the terms are set down in painstaking detail. This is where the widow's independence chest truly begins, not with wood, but with words. You're witnessing the drafting of the marriage contract, a document as crucial as any royal treaty for the future security of the woman involved. The mainstream historical reality here is the sheer formality and specificity of medieval marriage contracts, especially in regions like Brittany with strong customary law. These weren't vague promises whispered over goblets of cheap wine. They were detailed, legally binding agreements, often drawn up by local notaries or learned men familiar with the coutumes. Crucially, they explicitly addressed the fate of the bride's property, her dowry brought into the marriage, and crucially, her dower rights, what she would receive back if her husband died first. The contract meticulously listed her entitlements, specific parcels of land, a portion of the movable goods, sometimes even rights to use the family mill or bakehouse. It spelled out exactly what would go into her chest, setting it apart from the general household goods. This legal foresight was her primary shield. Now, for a quirky, almost darkly humorous contractual clause you might stumble upon, provisions for livestock contingencies. Imagine clauses specifying, in the event that the brindled cow, known as Belle, shall perish of the murrain before the husband's demise, she shall be replaced in value by 2 healthy geese and 1 pig of at least 2 summers. They thought of everything. Or how about clauses detailing the quality and quantity of firewood the widow was entitled to annually from specific family woodlots? It wasn't just about grand inheritances. It was about ensuring she wouldn't freeze because her late husband's nephew was stingy with the logs. This granular level of detail, down to the replacement value of a prized chicken, underscores the brutal practicality of medieval life. Security was measured in sacks of grain, cords of wood, and the durability of woolen cloaks. But historians still argue intensely about the power dynamics embedded in these contracts. Was the bride, or her female relatives, actively involved in negotiating these terms? Or was it primarily a transaction between men, the bride's father or guardian and the groom, or his father? Some scholars point to instances where widows later fiercely defended contracts in court, suggesting a deep understanding and personal stake. Fragments of letters and court depositions sometimes hint at mothers and aunts whispering advice. Others contend that while the outcome protected women, the negotiation process itself was largely patriarchal. The contract secured her survival, but did it reflect her choice? Was it empowerment or a pre-negotiated safety net designed by the very system it protected her from? The parchment holds the terms, but the silent negotiations behind it remain shrouded. You can almost hear the scratch of the quill, the low murmur of the men discussing fields and livestock values, the occasional interjection from a sharp-eyed grandmother whose own chest had seen her through hard times. The bride herself might be present, silent in the corner, perhaps embroidering, her future being bartered over like a shipment of salt cod. The scent is parchment, ink, damp wool from the men's cloaks, and maybe a faint undercurrent of the herbal infusion meant to steady nerves. The atmosphere is tense, purposeful. Every item promised for the chest, the number of sheets, the quality of the cookpot, the weight of the woolen blankets, is a brick in the wall protecting her future vulnerability. Each clause is a potential battleground avoided later. Think of the contract as the blueprint, and the chest as the structure being built to its specifications. The carpenter crafting the chest might even be present, taking discreet notes on its required size based on the inventory being listed. 6 pairs of sheets, hemmed and durable. Better make it 3 handspans deep, then. The iron bands aren't just decoration, they're a physical manifestation of the contract's binding strength. The lock, whether metal or a cleverly concealed wooden mechanism, symbolizes the exclusivity of her claim. Once sealed with wax and witnessed, this agreement becomes the bedrock upon which her potential widowhood rests. It transforms the chest from mere storage into a legally sanctioned vault. And here's a subtle, crucial point. The contract often stipulated when and how the chest would be filled. The initial loading typically happened just before or after the wedding ceremony, witnessed by both families. This wasn't a private affair, it was a public declaration. Neighbors might peek through open doors. The transfer of goods, the linens, the woolens, the essential tools, was a ritual, a tangible transfer of security from the bride's birth family to her own future self. Each item placed inside was a physical affirmation of the contract's promises. You can picture the slightly awkward silence as a particularly fine blanket is handed over, the groom's mother perhaps masking a flicker of resentment. That chest filling up was the sound of independence being carefully, publicly assembled, plank by plank, clause by clause. It was hope made manifest in wool and wood. The weight settles. The lid closes, maybe for the first time. The lock clicks, or the hidden sequence is tested. The contract is signed, sealed, and stored somewhere safe, perhaps even copied and kept by the local lord or priest as an additional safeguard. The chest itself, now imbued with legal significance, sits heavily in the corner of the newlyweds' home. It's a constant, silent witness to their life together. Every argument, every shared meal, every child born, happens in the shadow of this box that holds her exit strategy. It's a morbid thought, perhaps, but in a world where death was a frequent, unannounced visitor, it was the ultimate pragmatism. The scrape of the wool carding continues, but now it's happening near her chest, filled according to her contract. The foundation is laid. Section 4. The scratch of the quill fades, replaced by a different, more visceral soundscape. You leave the hushed tension of the contract signing and step into the sharp, resinous air of the carpenter's yard. Sunlight, weak but welcome after the cottage gloom, slants through gaps in a rough timber canopy, catching swirling galaxies of sawdust. Your nose wrinkles at the potent cocktail of smells: fresh split oak, hot animal glue simmering in a pot over a small brazier, the sharp tang of iron from tools, and the earthy musk of the carpenter himself, a man named Jan, whose thick forearms are mapped with old scars and newer wood stains. This is where the contract takes physical form. Here, under Jan's calloused hands, the widow's independence chest begins its life, not as a symbol, but as a profoundly functional object built to outlast generations. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this scene is the reliance on local materials and craftsmanship. These chests weren't shipped in from Parisian luxury workshops. They were born right here, in village yards or small town workshops, using timber sourced from nearby forests, predominantly oak. Brittany's oak was legendary for its density and resistance to rot, crucial qualities in a perpetually damp climate. Shipbuilders prized it, and so did chest makers. The carpenter, often a respected figure in the community, knew his wood intimately. He'd select planks not just for straightness, but for how the grain ran, ensuring maximum strength for the corners and base that would bear the crushing weight of linens, woolens, and a widow's future. His tools, adze, broadaxe, saw, auger, chisels, were extensions of his skill, passed down or painstakingly forged by the local blacksmith. Now, for a quirky detail that speaks volumes about medieval practicality and superstition, the devil's peg. Sometimes, discreetly, perhaps hidden within a dovetail joint or under a bottom board, the carpenter might drive a single peg made of a different wood, rowan or ash, often, believed to ward off evil spirits or, more pragmatically, woodworm. It was a tiny act of insurance, blending folklore with a desperate hope to protect the precious contents from unseen ravagers. Imagine the carpenter muttering a quick charm under his breath as he taps it home, a secret nod to forces beyond the plane and chisel. It wasn't in the contract, but it was part of the unwritten guarantee. Historians still argue, however, about the standardization of these chests. Was there a recognized widow's chest design, distinct from other storage chests? Some scholars point to certain common features: the exceptional thickness of the bottom boards to withstand damp earthen floors, the frequent use of iron strapping not just for decoration but for structural integrity, and the often massive locks or complex locking mechanisms. They suggest these elements formed a recognizable type, signaling the chest's specific legal and social purpose. Others counter that chest design was primarily regional and functional, dictated by available timber, the carpenter's skill, and the family's budget. A wealthy merchant's widow might have a chest with intricate iron scrollwork. A fisherman's widow got pure, brutal functionality. Was the independence chest a distinct category, or just a sturdy box repurposed by law and custom? The surviving chests whisper, but don't quite settle the debate. Feel the texture under your fingers now. Run your hand along a plank Jan has just planed. It's not perfectly smooth like modern furniture. It has a life to it, subtle ripples and variations where the tool bit deeper or skipped. It's warm from friction, smelling deeply of the forest. Hear the rhythmic thunk-thunk-thunk as he drives stout oak pegs into carefully bored holes, joining thick corner posts to the sides. Mortise and tenon joints, no flimsy nails that might pull loose under strain. This chest isn't just assembled, it's constructed, like a tiny fortress or a ship's hull meant to weather storms. Each blow of his wooden mallet echoes with finality. He's building something meant to endure decades of use, damp, and the inevitable arguments that would erupt when its lid finally needed to be opened under sorrowful circumstances. Watch Jan work. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool air. He squints, tongue slightly protruding in concentration as he lines up a joint. There's no power saw whine, just the shushing rasp of the plane, the gritty scrape of the saw, the solid impact of mallet on wood or chisel. It's slow, deliberate, almost meditative work. You notice the careful way he orients the grain on the lid, ensuring it won't warp easily with humidity changes. He might even slightly hollow the center of the lid panel, a subtle trick to counteract future swelling. This isn't just carpentry. It's woodcraft honed by generations of dealing with Brittany's demanding climate. Every shaving curling away from his plane represents hours of labor, a tangible investment in security. The bride's father might stop by, running a critical hand over the nearly joined frame. He's not just checking the carpenter's work, he's assessing the physical strength of his daughter's safety net. He knocks on the wood, listening for a solid, dead sound, not a hollow ring that might indicate rot or weakness. He examines the thickness of the iron straps the blacksmith delivered, testing their rigidity. He might even haggle over the final price, but there's an underlying seriousness to the transaction. This isn't a piece of furniture. It's a life raft being built on dry land. Jan meets his gaze steadily. His reputation hinges on this chest surviving long enough to fulfill its grim purpose. And consider the weight. Even empty, a chest built from thick Breton oak planks is a beast. Moving it requires grunting effort, sliding it on logs, or hefting it with strong arms. Its sheer mass is its first defense, against thieves, against fire, somewhat, against careless handling. Once filled, it becomes practically immovable without significant effort, anchoring the widow's claim literally and figuratively to the hearthside. Its bulk says, "I belong here, and what's inside belongs to her." The carpenter isn't just shaping wood. He's shaping destiny, one heavy, resin-scented plank at a time. The scree-scree of his chisel paring down a tenon is the sound of future security being meticulously fitted together. The light shifts as the afternoon wanes. The chest's carcass stands complete on the workbench, a boxy, formidable shape. Jan begins smoothing the interior surfaces, ensuring no rough snags will catch precious linens. Soon, the blackened iron straps will be fixed, the lock mechanism installed. The smell of hot glue intensifies as he reinforces key joints. It's a smell of permanence, of things meant to stay fixed. Outside the workshop, the ordinary life of the village continues. Chickens cluck, a cart rumbles by, but inside, under Jan's focused gaze, something extraordinary is taking shape, a wooden guarantee. The contract had the words, "This chest is the physical punctuation mark." It's the period at the end of a legal sentence, solid, heavy, and built to last. Section 5. The scent of fresh wood shavings fades, replaced by the warmer, more complex aromas of a home preparing for ceremony. You're back inside, not in the carpenter's yard, but in the bustling main room of the bride's family home. Sunlight, straining through small, thick-glassed windows, catches dust motes dancing in the air. The newly built chest, smelling faintly of oak and glue, sits centrally on the packed earth floor, its lid open like a waiting mouth. Around it, the atmosphere hums with a tense sort of industry. This isn't packing for a holiday. It's the meticulous, witnessed transfer of a woman's economic future. The dowry loading is about to begin. Mainstream history confirms this was a highly ritualized event. It wasn't a casual tossing of items into a box. Specific goods, meticulously listed in the marriage contract, were physically transferred from the bride's family's possession into her chest, often just before or immediately after the wedding ceremony itself. This transfer was typically witnessed by representatives from both families, sometimes even the local priest or respected elder, ensuring no dispute could later arise about what was promised and what was delivered. It was a public affirmation of the contract, turning abstract clauses into tangible reality. The chest, now present, became the undeniable proof. Now, for a quirky, surprisingly widespread superstition woven into this practical act, the deliberate spilling of grain. As the first items, often sacks of barley, rye, or oats, essential for bread and porridge, were poured into the chest, a small handful might be intentionally spilled onto the floor near the chest or even inside it before the sack was properly emptied. This wasn't carelessness, it was a deliberate offering, a charm for abundance. Spilled grain symbolized future plenty spilling over, ensuring the widow would never go hungry. Sweeping it up afterwards might even be seen as bad luck. Imagine the careful dance, the solemn transfer, the surreptitious sprinkle, the quick shuffle to hide the accident from overly pious witnesses. Practicality and magic, hand in hand. Historians still argue, however, about the bride's role during this transfer. Was she an active participant, carefully placing her linens, checking the quality of the woolens handed to her? Or was she expected to be a passive observer, perhaps even absent from the room, while the men of her family and her husband's family conducted the business? Some scholars point to the deeply personal nature of many items, her spun thread, her sewing tools, her best head coverings, suggesting she must have had input. Others argue the ritual was transactional, performed for her benefit but not by her. Was she silently cataloguing each item, her future security measured in sacks and sheets, or was she sequestered elsewhere, trusting her fate to the men and the contract? The silence of the historical record on her direct actions during this specific moment leaves room for debate. Feel the textures now. Watch as the bride's mother, her face a mask of solemn pride and underlying anxiety, unfold a stack of hand-woven linens. They're not dazzling white, they're the color of cream or pale oatmeal, bearing the subtle variations of home-dyed threads. Each sheet, each towel, is smoothed with reverence before being laid flat in the chest's bottom. You hear the soft whump of the fabric settling. The quality is scrutinized openly by the groom's mother or aunt, fingers testing the thread count, eyes checking for weak spots or clumsy mending. A poorly hemmed sheet isn't just shoddy work. It's a potential breach of contract, a crack in the future shield. The air thrums with unspoken judgments. Next come the woolens. Heavy, dense garments smelling faintly of lanolin and the herbs used to deter moths during storage. A thick winter cloak, it's lined with rabbit fur, a luxury for many, is folded with care. Stockings, skirts, tunics, layers meant to fend off the Breton chill. They're not fashionable, they're armor against the elements. You see the weight of them as they're placed, filling the chest quickly, compressing the linens beneath. Someone might murmur about the quality of the fulling. Was the wool beaten thoroughly enough to make it weather-resistant? This isn't just about warmth, it's about durability, about garments lasting years, perhaps decades. Then, the clunk of heavier items. A large, well-scrubbed copper cooking pot, its handle worn smooth by generations of use in the bride's family hearth, is lowered in. It nestles amongst the woolens. Wooden bowls, spoons carved from horn or dense fruitwood, perhaps a simple iron griddle for baking flatbreads over coals. These aren't decorative pieces, they're the essential tools of daily survival. Each one placed is a declaration. She will be able to feed herself. The groom's father might heft the pot, testing its solidity, ensuring it's not cracked or paper thin. Every item is an investment scrutinized. Witness the careful placement of smaller, crucial items. A carved wooden distaff, ready to hold flax or wool for spinning, the symbol of her economic contribution. A smooth, polished spindle whorl. A simple wooden casket containing needles of varying sizes, bone pins, maybe a pair of small shears. These are the tools of her trade, her ability to add value, to mend, to create. Placed near the top, easily accessible, they signify ongoing productivity, not just stored wealth. The bride's younger sister might be tasked with placing these, her small hands emphasizing their importance. And the grains. Sacks of oats, rye, barley, the foundation of sustenance. They're poured in carefully, filling the gaps around the pots and bowls. You hear the dry rustle, like a constant, reassuring whisper. This is the bulk, the ballast. It's heavy, immovable once the chest is full. This grain represents months of potential meals. Watch for that subtle moment, the spill. A handful of barley kernels deliberately scattered onto the woolens before the sack is properly emptied. A quick glance exchanged between the bride's mother and an aunt, a tiny nod. An offering to unseen forces for continued abundance. The groom's uncle might raise an eyebrow, but says nothing. Some traditions transcend legalities. The chest is filling rapidly now. The air grows thicker, quieter, as the final items are added. Perhaps a small, locally made earthenware jar filled with precious salt. Maybe a length of sturdy rope, useful for 100 tasks. Finally, the documents, the precious marriage contract itself, painstakingly copied, rolled and tied with a ribbon, placed right on top, or perhaps tucked into a small inner pouch if the chest design allowed. The proof. The key. The lid is heavy. It takes 2 people to lift it and lower it slowly onto the filled chest. It settles with a deep, resonant thud that seems to vibrate through the floor. The sound of finality. The lock is presented, a sturdy iron mechanism, perhaps, or the carpenter demonstrates the hidden wooden latch sequence to the bride alone, her fingers tracing the memorized pattern. The key is handed to her, or the secret is whispered. The witnesses nod. It is done. The public ritual is complete. The chest, now laden with the weight of linens, wool, grain, tools, and documents, sits massively in the corner. It's no longer just wood and iron. It's a promise solidified, a future secured. The scrape of the carding wool can resume, but now it happens near a fortress brimming with potential. The journey to the hearthside begins. Section 6. The heavy thud of the chest lid closing echoes, but your focus shifts downward, beneath the weight of woolens and grain, to the very foundation of the widow's security, the linens. Imagine peeling back those coarse woolen layers, the scratchy outer shell of survival, to reveal the softer, yet equally vital, core. Your fingers brush against the first layer, not silk, not velvet, but sturdy, homespun linen. Cool, smooth, and smelling faintly of sunlight, lye soap, and the earthy tang of flax retted in a village pond months, even years, before. This isn't luxury. It's the bedrock of domestic life, the quiet workhorse of medieval existence. The mainstream historical fact grounding this layer is the sheer universality and importance of linen in the medieval household. Flax was widely cultivated in regions like Brittany, transformed through a laborious, months-long process into thread, then woven into cloth. This linen formed the essential base layer of clothing: shirts, shifts, undergarments, bedding, sheets, pillowcases, and household textiles, towels, tablecloths, napkins. Its value lay in its durability, washability, and relative comfort against the skin compared to rough wool. For the widow, a substantial stack of quality linen meant hygiene, dignity, and the ability to present a respectable household, crucial for maintaining social standing or attracting potential new partners. A chest without good linen was like a fortress without a water supply. Now, for a quirky, deeply personal detail often found in these linen layers, the widow's stitch. Some sheets or shifts, particularly those woven or sewn by the bride herself in the years leading up to her marriage, might incorporate a tiny, deliberate imperfection in the stitching, perhaps a single stitch sewn backwards, or a minute variation in a hem. This wasn't carelessness, it was a whispered signature, a hidden charm. Folklore suggested this intentional flaw warded off the evil eye of envy and protected the owner, a future widow, from malicious spirits or gossip. It was a secret pact between the maker and the garment, a tiny rebellion against perfection in an uncertain world. Finding it decades later might evoke a pang of memory for the woman who stitched her hope and superstition into the fabric. But historians still vigorously debate how linen quality was truly assessed and valued in these chests. Was it purely practical, thread count, measured in threads per inch, crudely assessed, tightness of weave, evenness of dye? Or did subtler social codes apply? Some scholars argue that the fineness of the stitching on hems and seams was a critical indicator of a woman's skill and diligence, scrutinized by both families during the loading. A beautifully embroidered monogram or edge, even on a utilitarian sheet, might signal higher status or exceptional care. Others contend that in the harsh reality of peasant life, pure durability trumped finesse. Was a coarsely woven but thick sheet worth more than a finely woven but thinner one? Did aesthetic touches genuinely increase the chest's protective value, or were they just vanity? The worn remnants in museums offer clues, but not definitive answers. Feel the texture now. Unfold one of these sheets. It's substantial, heavier than you might expect. Its weave dense and resilient. Hold it up to the weak light filtering through the cottage window. You see the slight irregularities, thicker threads here, a subtle waver in the weave there, testament to the human hand at the loom, not a machine's perfection. It smells clean, but with an underlying earthiness, the ghost of the flax field. Run your thumb along a hem. The stitching is small, tight, remarkably even. Hundreds upon hundreds of tiny stitches, each a moment of effort, each securing the edge against fraying in countless future washings. This is hours, days, of labor folded neatly. Consider the journey of this single sheet. It began as tough flax stalks pulled from muddy ground, bundled, and submerged in a stagnant pond for weeks. The stinking process of retting that rotted away the outer husk to free the inner fibers. You can almost smell that potent, putrid odor drifting over the village. Then came breaking, crushing the brittle stalks with wooden mallets, and scutching, beating them to remove the woody bits, filling the air with choking dust. Finally, heckling, dragging the fibers through iron combs to align them, leaving hands raw and bleeding. Only then could the spinning begin, the rhythmic twist of spindle and whirl transforming rough fibers into smooth, strong thread. The weaving itself, on a heavy wooden loom, was a physical feat. This sheet represents a monumental investment of female labor, often shared among mothers, daughters, and sisters. Watch as the stack grows in the chest. 6 pairs of sheets, 8 towels, 3 shifts, 4 coifs, head coverings, the quantities specified in the contract. Each item is inspected. The groom's mother runs a critical finger along a seam, testing its strength. The bride's aunt holds a towel up, checking for thin spots. The quality of the bleaching matters too. Linens left out on grassy bleaching grounds to be whitened by sun and dew commanded higher value than the grayish, unbleached cloth. A well-bleached sheet signaled resources, time, space, and enough linen to rotate while others were being whitened. And the feel against the skin. After a day wearing scratchy wool, damp from sea mist or sweat, slipping into a clean linen shift at night must have felt like a whisper of comfort. It absorbed sweat, could be boiled clean to remove lice and fleas, somewhat, and provided a barrier between skin and the potentially irritating woolen outer garments or rough blankets. For the widow, maintaining this linen, keeping it clean and mended, was an ongoing act of preserving her own dignity and health. A chest full of rotting or threadbare linen was a disaster. Imagine the widow, years later, opening her chest after her husband's passing. Beneath the heavier items, she finds this layer. Unfolding a sheet she spun as a girl, smelling that familiar sun and soap scent, feeling the weight of the fabric woven perhaps by her own mother's hands. It's more than cloth, it's a tactile connection to her past self, her family, her pre-widowhood identity. That tiny widow's stitch she sewed, half forgotten, catches her finger. A shiver, not of cold, but of recognition, might pass through her. The linen wasn't just practical, it was deeply personal, a repository of memory and effort, the soft, strong foundation upon which her hard-won independence rested. The scrape of the wool carding outside continues, but inside the chest, the linen lies quiet, cool, and enduring, the unsung hero of survival. Section 7. You peel back the final layer of cool, smooth linen, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. The air thickens with the scent of lanolin, damp earth, and something pungent, rosemary, thyme, maybe a sharp hint of wormwood. Beneath the foundational linens lies the heavy, insulating armor of the widow's world, the woolens. Think less cozy cashmere sweater, more dense, scratchy fortress woven from the backs of Breton sheep. Your fingers brush coarse, undyed fabric, thick enough to turn aside wind, rain, and the pervasive chill seeping from stone walls. This is survival worn on the body, the indispensable outer shell. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this layer is the absolute dominance of wool in medieval outerwear and insulation. Sheep were ubiquitous in Brittany, grazing on windswept coastal hills and moorlands. Their wool, often coarse and oily, lanolin-rich for water resistance, was the primary material for cloaks, tunics, skirts, hoods, stockings, and heavy blankets. Processing it was labor-intensive, shearing, washing, in stale urine to degrease, a smelly process, carding, spinning, weaving, and fulling, beating the woven cloth in water, often with fuller's earth, to shrink and thicken it. For the widow, a substantial stock of quality woolens meant the difference between shivering through winter and retaining vital body heat. It was her primary defense against a climate that could be lethally damp and cold. Now, for a quirky, multi-sensory defense mechanism packed with the woolens, the moth-marauding mix. Tucked amongst the folds, often in small linen bags or simply strewn loose, were pungent herbs specifically chosen to repel fabric pests. Rosemary for its sharp scent, lavender for its sweetness, and fleas, incidentally, tansy for its bitterness, and sometimes even dried, crumbled tobacco leaves long before smoking was common in Europe. But the real star, the secret weapon whispered about by grandmothers, dried, powdered hedgehog dung. Seriously, folk belief held its unique, musky odor was utterly repugnant to moths. Imagine unpacking your precious winter cloak years later and getting a noseful of that earthy, slightly acrid aroma, the price paid for preservation. A small, stinky sacrifice against the silent ravages of hungry larvae. But historians still fiercely debate the social language woven into these woolens. Was the quality, color, achieved through expensive dyes like woad for blue or madder for red, or cut of the garments a deliberate signal of status within the chest? Some scholars argue that a finely woven, dyed cloak folded amongst undyed, homespun stockings was a clear marker. This widow possessed some items of relative value, elevating her standing even in hardship. Others contend that in the practical, often impoverished context of rural Brittany, pure functionality trumped fashion. Was a thick, undyed blanket that retained heat better than a thinner, dyed one actually more valuable? Did a cloak cut in a slightly more current style, gleaned from market towns, signal aspirational status, or was it merely a hammer-down? The debate hinges on whether these chests reflected nuanced social coding or brute force survival pragmatism. Feel the weight now. Lift one corner of a heavy, fulled woolen cloak. It's dense, almost stiff, smelling overwhelmingly of sheep and herbs. It drapes like lead, not silk. Run your fingers over the weave, thick, rough threads forming a near-felted surface designed to shed water and trap warmth. This isn't comfortable, it's functional. You can imagine the scratch against bare skin, the constant low-level irritation endured for the sake of not freezing. Picture wearing this in a drafty cottage, the damp Breton fog seeping under the door, the hearth fire struggling. This cloak is a mobile shelter. Consider the layers represented. Folded beneath the cloak might be thick stockings, essential for warmth but prone to wearing out at the heel and toe. Skirts or tunics of slightly lighter, but still substantial, wool. Maybe a separate hood, lined with rough rabbit fur or lamb's wool for extra neck protection against the Atlantic gales. Each item represents countless hours. The shepherd tending flocks, the women carding the sticky wool, leaving hands raw, spinning the coarse yarn, a constant, arm-aching task, weaving it on heavy looms, fulling it in communal troughs, a noisy, wet, physical process. Then the sewing, pushing thick needles through resistant fabric. The value here isn't in beauty. It's in accumulated labor and sheer thermal efficiency. Witness the scrutiny during loading. The groom's father hefts a blanket, testing its weight and thickness. He might even hold it up to the light, checking for thin patches or moth holes already present, a potential point of contention. The bride's mother might defensively point out the density of the fulling, how tightly the fibers are matted together. A good, heavy blanket was like gold. It could last decades if protected. The presence of fur lining on a hood would be noted, a significant luxury indicating a slightly higher standing or a particularly valuable pelt traded at market. Every ounce of wool represented security against the biting cold. And the battle against decay. The herbs and the infamous hedgehog dung weren't just superstition, they were frontline defense. Moths were a constant, insidious threat. Their larvae could silently devour a precious cloak from the inside out, reducing it to useless dust. The pungent mix was the medieval equivalent of chemical warfare, waged inside the oak fortress of the chest. The smell, though perhaps unpleasant to human noses, was a reassuring barrier. Unpacking years later and finding the wool intact, smelling faintly of rosemary and something indefinably earthy, that dung, would be a profound relief. The chest wasn't just storage, it was a preservation chamber. Imagine the widow, years later, pulling out this cloak as autumn gales begin to howl. She shakes it out, releasing a cloud of dust and that familiar, medicinal herbal scent. She drapes its heavy, scratchy embrace around her shoulders. The weight is familiar, anchoring. It's not just warmth, it's the weight of foresight, of the contract fulfilled, of her mother's anxious scrutiny during the loading. It smells of sheep pastures, hearth smoke, and the desperate ingenuity of preservation. Wearing it, she carries not just wool, but the collective effort that filled her chest, the shepherd, the spinner, the weaver, the fuller, her own younger self who helped card the stubborn fibers. The cloak is a second skin of independence, woven from necessity and law. The scrape of the carding wool outside might be her own now, preparing the next layer of defense, but wrapped in the old wool, she is shielded by the past. Section 8. Beneath the scratchy fortress of woolens, your hands encounter something different. A yielding softness, a faint whispering rustle, and a smell that's equal parts comforting and concerning. Dried grass, old feathers, dust, and an unsettling hint of pepper? You've reached the bedding layer. Forget plush memory foam. This is the medieval Breton answer to a good night's sleep, the feather mattress and its accompanying blankets. It's where exhaustion met discomfort, where the promise of rest was perpetually undermined by tiny, uninvited guests. This layer wasn't about luxury. It was about collapsing horizontal without freezing, a vital component of the widow's physical resilience. The mainstream historical fact grounding this is the near-universal use of straw pallets or feather mattresses atop wooden bedsteads or simple platforms. For the widow, possessing her own mattress and blankets was crucial. It meant she wouldn't be relegated to sleeping on a cold, hard floor or dependent on charity for bedding. Feather mattresses, especially those filled with goose or duck down, though often mixed with cheaper chicken feathers and even stray bits of straw, were prized possessions. Blankets were typically thick wool, layered for warmth. Quality bedding directly impacted health. Inadequate sleep on cold, damp surfaces was a fast track to illness in an era without modern medicine. A chest containing a decent mattress and warm covers was a chest-preserving vitality. Now, for the quirky, slightly horrifying reality woven into this softness, the flea trap. Tucked deep within the folded mattress or blankets, often near the seams, you might find small linen pouches filled with pungent substances specifically chosen to repel or kill fleas and bedbugs. Dried, crushed pennyroyal leaves, toxic in large doses, but effective, bitter wormwood, pungent rosemary, and yes, more of that trusty dried tobacco. But the most desperate measure, dried, powdered hedgehog skin. Again, the humble hedgehog. Folk belief attributed near-magical pest-repelling properties to its spiny hide. Imagine hoping the ghostly essence of crumbled hedgehog would deter the nightly onslaught of six-legged invaders sharing your bed. It was a fragrant, slightly grotesque act of domestic warfare. But historians still fiercely debate the actual effectiveness and relative value of feather quality in these chests. Was a mattress stuffed purely with goose down significantly more valuable and desirable than one filled with cheaper, scratchier chicken feathers mixed with chaff? Some scholars argue yes, pointing to inventories where goose down mattresses are listed separately and sometimes appraised higher. They suggest it was a subtle status marker and genuine comfort upgrade. Others contend that in the damp Breton climate, any insulating layer was paramount, and feather type mattered less than the mattress's sheer existence and thickness. Did a widow sleeping on pure goose down sleep significantly better, or was she just marginally less itchy while still sharing her bed with determined arthropods? The scholarly jury remains out, lost in a cloud of ancient dust mites. Feel the texture now. Press down on the folded feather mattress. It yields reluctantly, releasing a puff of fine dust and feather fragments that catch in the dim light. It's lumpy, uneven, feathers inevitably migrated, clustering in some areas, leaving hollows in others. It smells musty, like an old attic, with that underlying herbal peppery scent of the flea traps. Unfold a thick wool blanket piled on top. It's heavy, dense, smelling of lanolin and smoke. It's not soft, it's weighty insulation. This bedding promised warmth, but rarely true comfort. Consider the labor involved. Each feather in that mattress represents a bird plucked, the down painstakingly separated from the larger feathers. Chicken feathers were plentiful but coarse. Goose down was softer but required more birds or careful saving over years. Cleaning feathers was a smelly, messy chore, washed, dried, sometimes even lightly scorched over fire to kill mites, risking a fire hazard. Stuffing the mattress casing, a sturdy linen sack, was a two-person job, one holding the open end taut while the other stuffed handfuls of feathers and filler inside, clouds of down swirling in the air. It was an annual or biennial chore, beating the mattress outside to fluff it, picking out clumps, adding new feathers if possible. The blanket, woven like the cloaks, represented the same immense effort from fleece to fabric. Witness the loading ritual. The feather mattress, bulky and awkward, is heaved into the chest with grunts of effort. It might be rolled tightly to fit, then unfurled to fill the available space, releasing its characteristic dust-to-feather smell. Blankets are layered on top, folded precisely. The groom's representative might give the mattress a firm pat, assessing its fullness, its resistance. A thin, lumpy mattress was a bad sign, a future of backaches and cold nights. The presence of multiple blankets would be noted. Each one was another layer against the chill. Flea traps? Those were added discreetly, perhaps by the bride's mother with a knowing glance, a private addition to the public inventory. And the nightly reality. Imagine sinking onto this mattress after a day of relentless labor. It sighs under your weight, lumps shifting, feathers poking through the casing. It's warm, yes, warmer than the floor. But almost immediately, you feel the telltale pricks. Fleas. Bed bugs emerging from cracks in the wooden bed frame or, worse, from the mattress itself. The herbal sachets offered scant defense against a determined infestation. You scratch. You toss. You pull the heavy blankets up, seeking warmth but also a futile barrier against the bites. Sleep was a fragmented, itchy affair, punctuated by the rustle of disturbed bedding and the occasional sharp slap against skin. The widow's independence included the right to her own personal ecosystem of pests. Yet, for all its discomfort, this bedding was life. In winter, buried under layers of wool blankets on a deep, if lumpy, mattress, you could achieve a fugitive warmth. The sheer weight of the covers was oddly comforting, a physical pressure warding off the world's cold. That dusty, feathery smell, mixed with herbs and wood smoke, was the smell of home, however imperfect. For the widow alone in her cottage, climbing into this bed, pulling her own covers around her, was an act of profound self-sufficiency. She wasn't huddled on a relative's floor. She was in her own bed, on her own mattress, under her own blankets, secured by the weight of her chest. The scratch-scratch of fleas might be her lullaby, but it was a lullaby she owned. Unpacking it years later, she'd fluff the flattened mattress, releasing that familiar, ancient dust. She'd shake out the blankets, perhaps finding a desiccated flea trap, its herbs long since scentless. She'd remake her bed. It wouldn't be comfortable by modern standards. It would be lumpy, itchy, and haunted by tiny ghosts. But it would be hers. A fortress against the cold, a bastion of personal space won through contract and foresight. As she sank into it, surrounded by the scratchy wool and shifting feathers, she might sigh, not just with weariness, but with the grim satisfaction of possessing this small, vital piece of her own domain. The scrape of the carding wool outside was tomorrow's work. Tonight, the battlefield was a mattress, and she held her ground. Section 9. You move past the yielding, pest-riddled softness of the bedding, your fingers encountering something harder, colder. Metal. Wood. The smooth, worn feel of well-used tools. This layer isn't about comfort or warmth. It's about the raw mechanics of staying alive, day after day. Welcome to the Hearth and Home Basics, the unglamorous engine room of the widow's independence. Here, nestled amongst linens or tucked beside the mattress, lie the essential tools for transforming raw ingredients into edible food, for drawing water, for the daily grind of keeping body and soul together. Forget gleaming copper pans. Think heavy, soot-blackened iron and dense, scarred wood. The mainstream historical reality is the sheer ubiquity and vital importance of basic cookware in every medieval household. For the widow, possessing her own means of cooking and food preparation wasn't just convenient. It was non-negotiable for survival. This typically included a large, three-legged iron cauldron, the workhorse for stews, porridge, and boiling water, a smaller cooking pot, perhaps copper or earthenware, wooden bowls and trenchers, thick slices of stale bread used as plates, later eaten or given to animals, wooden spoons and ladles, a simple iron griddle for baking flatbreads or oatcakes, a knife, crucial for everything from food prep to basic repairs, and a bucket or two for water. Without these, she couldn't feed herself. The chest guaranteed she wouldn't be reduced to begging for the use of a neighbor's fire. Now, for a quirky, surprisingly poignant custom sometimes associated with the cookpot, the soup stone. When a bride received her cauldron, particularly if it was an heirloom piece passed down from her mother or grandmother, it might come with a specific, smooth, fist-sized river stone nestled inside. This stone wasn't for cooking. It was a thermal regulator and a charm. Placed in the bottom of the pot while cooking soups or stews, it absorbed heat, helping to prevent the bottom from scorching over an uneven fire. But it was also believed to carry the luck and protective spirit of the previous owner. A widow using her mother's pot and stone wasn't just making soup, she was invoking ancestral safeguarding over her solitary hearth. Imagine her fingers brushing that smooth, familiar stone each time she cooked, a silent connection across the years. But historians still vigorously debate the relative value placed on new versus used items in these chests. Was a brand new, thick-bottomed iron cauldron, gleaming, briefly, before the soot coated it, a significant status marker and practical advantage over a well-used but thinner one? Some scholars argue yes, pointing to the expense of ironwork and the desirability of durability. A new pot represented investment and a longer lifespan. Others contend that in the practical, resource-scarce world of medieval peasants, a proven, well-seasoned pot, one that hadn't cracked or burned through despite years of use, was actually more valuable. It was a known quantity. Did the widow value the heirloom stone and its patina of use over the theoretical longevity of new iron? The worn surfaces in museum collections hint at long lives, but the debate simmers on. Feel the weight now. Heft the iron cauldron. It's astonishingly heavy, cold, and unyielding. Its three stubby legs are designed to sit steadily in the embers of a hearth fire. The bottom and lower sides are crusted with layers of ancient soot and carbonized food, a patina of countless meals. It smells of old smoke and iron, a metallic tang underlying the wood smoke. Run your finger inside. It might be surprisingly smooth in places from decades of stirring, yet pitted and rough elsewhere. This is a veteran of the hearth. Now pick up a wooden bowl. It's dense, perhaps oak or beech, turned on a lathe or carved by hand. Its surface is worn silky smooth from use, from countless scrubbings with sand and water. It feels solid, reliable. A wooden spoon feels similar, the bowl worn down slightly from constant scraping against pot bottoms. Consider the sheer necessity of each piece. The cauldron, for boiling water, making it safer to drink, for simmering tough cuts of meat or root vegetables for hours until edible, for making the ubiquitous pottage, a thick, often monotonous stew of grains, vegetables, and scraps of meat or fat that formed the backbone of the medieval diet. The smaller pot, perhaps for heating milk, making smaller portions, or cooking sauces. The griddle, for baking the daily bread, often dense rye or barley loaves, or flat oat cakes, portable sustenance. The bowls and spoons, the essential tools for consuming it all. The knife, an extension of the hand, used for preparing ingredients, eating, mending nets, whittling pegs, 100 daily tasks. The bucket, for hauling water from the well or stream, a physically demanding chore repeated multiple times a day. Each item represents a specific, unavoidable task in the unending cycle of survival. Witness the transfer. The iron cauldron is lowered into the chest with a heavy clunk, its sooty base leaving a smudge on the clean linen beneath it. Someone might wipe it hastily, but the mark remains. The wooden bowls are stacked carefully, the spoons bundled together. The griddle, perhaps wrapped in sacking to protect other items from its rough edges. The knife, in a simple leather sheath, placed securely. The bucket, nested inside the cauldron to save space. The groom's uncle might test the cauldron's stability, rocking it slightly. He might inspect the knife blade for nicks, the wooden bowls for cracks. A cracked bowl wasn't just broken crockery. It was a potential source of splinters and wasted food. Every chip, every thin spot on the pot, was assessed. And the soup stone. If it's included, it might be placed ceremoniously inside the cauldron by the bride's grandmother, her gnarled hands lingering on the smooth surface. A murmured blessing, perhaps, lost in the general noise. Or it might be slipped in discreetly. The groom's family might exchange puzzled glances, but say nothing. It's a small, private ritual within the public transaction. The stone settles at the bottom of the pot, a silent passenger. Imagine the widow, alone in her cottage. She hauls water from the well, the bucket heavy in her hands. She builds a fire in the hearth, coaxing life from damp wood. She fills her cauldron with water and lentils, perhaps a chunk of salted pork if she's fortunate. She stirs it with her wooden spoon, the familiar scrape against the pot's bottom, a rhythmic counterpoint to the crackling fire. The stone rests unseen beneath the simmering liquid, doing its practical and symbolic work. She ladles the stew into her worn wooden bowl. The heat seeps into the wood, warming her hands. She eats with her knife, cutting tough bread on the trencher. This is the essence of independence, played out daily. Not grand gestures, but the quiet, relentless act of feeding oneself. The tools are crude, the food monotonous, the effort constant. But every scrape of the spoon, every sip from the bowl, is a declaration made tangible by the chest. I provide for myself. The soot on the pot, the smoothness of the spoon handle, the familiar weight of the knife, these are the signatures of her autonomy. The hearth, tended with her tools, becomes the warm, beating heart of her solitary domain. The scrape isn't just cooking. It's the sound of resilience, echoing the carding wool, all powered by the weight of oak and iron in the corner. The stone in the pot, if she has one, is a tiny, hard kernel of continuity, a whisper from the past saying, "You are not alone. You are of the line that endures." Section 10. You lift the heavy iron cauldron aside, its sooty base leaving a ghostly ring on the linen beneath, and your fingers brush against something long, slender, and deceptively simple. Not metal, not wood-shaped for eating, but tools humming with a different kind of potential. Tucked beside the bowls, or perhaps wrapped in a fold of cloth, lie the instruments of creation, a distaff and a spindle. Forget swords or plowshares. In the widow's world, this is the true scepter and orb, the unassuming key to her ongoing economic survival. It looks humble, a stick and a weighted whirl, but it's the engine of her independence. The mainstream historical fact anchoring these tools is the absolute centrality of spinning to the medieval household economy, particularly for women. Virtually all clothing, linens, sails, ropes, and sacks began as raw flax or wool transformed into thread through spinning. It was women's work, ubiquitous and relentless, performed in every spare moment, while watching children, tending animals, or sitting by the fire at night. For the widow, possessing her own distaff and spindle wasn't just practical, it was her license to produce. With them, she could transform raw fleece or flax into saleable yarn, mend garments, weave bandages, or create new cloth for her own use. No distaff, no spindle, no thread. No thread meant no mending, no weaving, no income, and a swift descent into destitution. The chest guaranteed she could always make something valuable. Now, for a quirky, slightly eerie piece of folklore clinging to these tools, the Sabbath distaff. Superstition warned that leaving flax or wool on a distaff overnight, especially on a Saturday, risked attracting the attention of mischievous spirits or even witches who would ride the distaff to their nocturnal gatherings, tangling the fibers or cursing the spinner's hands. To prevent this, some women would deliberately remove the fiber from the distaff before sunset, or even cross the distaff by placing a piece of straw or a pin in a specific way through the bound flax. Imagine a widow, weary after a long day, still mustering the energy to unwind her flax bundle, not just for tidiness, but as a protective ritual against spectral sabotage. It was spinning paranoia, medieval edition. But historians still argue intensely about the relative skill and value attributed to spinners in different social strata. Was the thread spun by a peasant widow considered inherently inferior, less valuable in the marketplace than thread spun by a bourgeois townswoman or a noblewoman, who likely delegated the actual spinning but took credit for the household's output? Some scholars point to guild regulations in towns suggesting standards of fineness and consistency, implying higher value for skilled work. Others contend that in rural economies, quantity and basic utility often trump finesse. Strong, serviceable yarn for socks or sacks was the priority, and the widow's skill was measured in output, not perfection. Did a perfectly even, gossamer fine thread command a premium that significantly boosted her income? Or was it largely wasted effort when coarse, durable yarn sold just as well? The spindle spins, but the debate remains tangled. Feel the tools now. Pick up the distaff, a length of smooth wood, perhaps ash or hazel, about the length of your forearm. One end might be forked or have a natural crook. Bound around it is a fluffy mass of carded wool, soft as a cloud but lanolin-rich and smelling faintly of sheep and the herbs used to clean it. Or it might hold a bundle of flax fibers, pale and smooth, smelling earthier. The distaff is tucked under your arm or stuck in a belt, anchoring the fibers ready to be drawn out. Now the spindle, a shorter wooden shaft, weighted near the bottom by a whirl. The whirl might be simple fired clay, cool and slightly rough, or polished stone, or dense wood. It feels solid, purposeful. Hold the spindle shaft between thumb and finger, give it a sharp twist, and watch it whirl, a hypnotic gyroscope hanging from the thread you draft from the distaff. Consider the motion. It looks simple. Draw fibers out with one hand, twist the spindle with the other, let the twist travel up the drafted fibers, wind the new yarn onto the spindle shaft. Repeat. Forever. It's rhythmic, almost meditative. Draw, twist, wind, draw, twist, wind. Your shoulders hunch slightly. Your fingers move with practiced, unconscious grace. But it's also relentless. To spin enough thread for a single shift could take days. For a blanket, weeks. It's the medieval equivalent of watching paint dry, but with more shoulder cramps. Think of it as the original doom scrolling. Your eyes glaze over, your hands move, and time stretches into an endless, fuzzy loop. At least you didn't have ads interrupting. Hear the sounds. The soft FZZZT as fibers pull apart. The gentle whir of the spindle while spinning freely, a low, resonant hum if it's stone or dense wood, a lighter buzz if it's clay. The faint tick as the shaft bumps against your skirt or a stool. Then the soft scratch-scratch as you wind the newly formed yarn onto the shaft, building the cop. It's a quiet symphony of creation, easily drowned by village life, yet constant, like the beating of a heart. The smell is wool, flax, lanolin, dust, and the faint metallic tang of your own sweat on a warm day. Witness their placement in the chest. They aren't buried. They're near the top, accessible. The distaff, bundled fiber still attached, might be laid alongside the spindle. The whirl's weight gives it substance. The groom's representative might pick up the spindle, test the whirl's balance. A well-balanced spindle spins truer and longer, making the work slightly less arduous. He might feel the smoothness of the distaff, ensuring no snags will catch the precious fibers. These aren't just tools, they're the widow's future productivity. Their quality directly impacts her ability to generate income. A spindle with a cracked whirl that wobbles, a distaff rough with splinters. These are not mere inconveniences, they're threats to her solvency. Imagine the widow, years later. Her husband is gone. The initial shock, the grief, the legal wrangling, if any, subsides. Now comes the quiet, grinding reality. She needs coin for salt, for a new bucket, maybe for the parish poor tax. She pulls out her distaff and spindle. She cards wool bought cheaply from a neighbor or saved from her own meager flock. She tucks the distaff under her arm. She starts the spindle spinning. Draw, twist, wind. The familiar rhythm takes over. The spindle whirs, a tiny, persistent engine driving her economy. Each yard of yarn she produces is a tiny victory, a fractional coin earned through time and muscle memory. It's mind-numbing, back-aching work. But as the cop of yarn on her spindle grows, so does her tangible security. It's slow magic, transforming fluff into currency. The distaff and spindle are more than tools. They are extensions of her body, her skill, her resilience. They represent the quiet, unglamorous power of continuous creation. In a world prone to taking things away, husbands, health, harvests, these simple objects guaranteed she could always add something, spin straw into, well, not gold, but into something. The scrape of the carding wool preparing the fiber, the whir of the spindle twisting it. These are the sounds of her independence chugging along, powered by her own hands. The oak chest held the promise, but the distaff and spindle held the means to fulfill it, one endless, hypnotic twist at a time. The hearth kept her warm, the spindle kept her solvent. Section 11. Past the spindle's quiet potential, your fingers encounter objects that promise not creation, but a fragile defiance of the encroaching dark. They're unassuming, bundles of dried, reed-like stalks and lumpy, greasy cylinders that leave a faint smear on your skin. Welcome to the widow's arsenal against the Breton night, rushlights and tallow candles. Forget electric bulbs, this is light born of fat, plant fiber, and perpetual smoke. It's a dim, smelly battle against shadows, vital for extending the useful hours of her solitary existence beyond sunset. The mainstream historical fact illuminating this layer is the near-universal reliance on these simple, cheap light sources throughout the medieval period, especially for the peasantry and lower middling sorts. Beeswax candles existed but were prohibitively expensive, reserved for churches and nobility. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, usually sheep or beef suet, and rushlights, dried rushes soaked in animal fat, were the everyday solution. For the widow, possessing her own supply meant she could mend, spin, read a simple prayer book, if she could read, or simply navigate her cottage after dusk without stubbing her toe or worse. Light extended her productive day and warded off the psychological weight of utter darkness. Now, for the quirky, olfactory nightmare fuel often accompanying this illumination, the fish oil supplement. In coastal areas like Brittany, where tallow from land animals might be scarce or expensive, enterprising, or desperate, souls sometimes substituted or supplemented their tallow with rendered fish oil. Cod liver oil, seal blubber, even pilchard fat could be rendered down. The light produced was marginally effective, but the smell? Imagine burning rancid fish guts. It was an acrid, greasy, fish market on fire stench that clung to hair, clothes, and the rafters. A widow using fish oil rushlights didn't just light her cottage, she fumigated it, possibly deterring pests and visitors alike. The trade-off: visibility versus vomit-inducing atmosphere. A true medieval dilemma. But historians still vigorously debate the actual effectiveness and health impact of these light sources. How many rushlights or tallow dips did it really take to provide usable light for spinning or reading? Some scholars, experimenting with replicas, argue a single rushlight gave only a pathetic, guttering glow barely sufficient to avoid walking into walls, lasting maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Others suggest multiple rushlights in a holder or a well-made tallow candle could create a pool of light adequate for close work. More critically, did the constant inhalation of tallow smoke, let alone fish oil smoke, laden with particulates and incomplete combustion products, contribute to chronic respiratory issues, the tallow cough? Was the widow trading her eyesight for lung capacity? The dim light of history hasn't fully illuminated the answers. Feel the objects now. Pick up a rushlight. It's surprisingly light, a dried rush stalk, stripped of its outer skin except for a thin strip to hold the pith together, about the length of your forearm. It feels dry, slightly brittle. Run your fingers along it. It might still feel faintly greasy from its fat bath. Now a tallow candle. It's heavier, denser, cool and waxy to the touch, but leaving a greasy residue. Its surface is uneven, lumpy, homemade, not mold. It smells faintly of old cooking fat, a stale, slightly rancid odor even before it's lit. The wick is a simple twist of flax or hemp fiber, protruding from the top. Consider the labor behind the light. Making rushlights was a messy, smelly chore. Rushes were harvested from damp ditches, peeled meticulously, a fiddly job, then dried. The tallow came from rendering down scraps of fat, a process involving boiling cauldrons of stinking animal trimmings, skimming off the impurities, leaving the liquid fat to cool and solidify. Dipping the rushes or repeatedly dipping wicks into the hot tallow to build up layers was hot, tedious work, filling the home with greasy smoke. It was women's work, naturally. The widow's chest held the finished product, sparing her, for now, the noxious process, but guaranteeing she could perform the tasks that required light. Hear the sound of their use. A rushlight clamped in a simple iron holder. The flame catches the dried pith with a tiny whump, then settles into a fragile, dancing tongue of yellow light. It hisses softly as the fat-soaked pith burns, dripping occasional gobbets of molten tallow that sizzle on the stone hearth below. A tallow candle offers a slightly steadier flame, but it gutters constantly in drafts, requiring frequent trimming of the wick with a ubiquitous knife, snip-snip, to prevent it from smoking excessively. The primary sound, the persistent, low sizzle of burning fat. Not exactly a crackling fireplace ambience. Witness the smell in action. Light the tallow candle. The initial scent is acrid smoke as the wick chars. Then comes the main event, the smell of burning animal fat. It's greasy, stale, like a dirty deep fryer left unattended for weeks. It coats the back of your throat, clings to your clothes. Add fish oil to the mix. It's an assault, fishy, rancid, industrial. The smoke is thick and grey, coiling upwards to blacken the rafters and sting the eyes. Forget romantic candlelit dinners. This is candlelit survival, a constant trade-off between seeing your spindle and breathing freely. Your eyes water. You cough. The very air feels heavy and used. See the quality of the light. It's dim. Oh so dim. A single rushlight casts long, leaping shadows, making the corners of the cottage seem cavernous and alive. Faces become masks of deep hollows and flickering highlights. Spinning by this light, you squint, bringing the distaff dangerously close to the flame. Reading. Only the largest, boldest script on a prayer card is possible, held inches from the guttering light. The light pool is small, intensely bright at the core but fading rapidly into gloom. It pushes back the darkness only a few feet, emphasizing how vast and enveloping the night truly is. It's less illumination, more a declaration of stubbornness against the void. Now, imagine the widow alone. Winter night falls early, thick and absolute. She lights a rushlight, perhaps saving the taller candle for longer tasks. The greasy light pushes back the shadows just enough. She picks up her spindle. The tiny flame dances in her tired eyes. She spins, the whir of the spindle a counterpoint to the sizzle of the burning rush. Smoke stings her nostrils. She squints at the fibers. Every minute of light is precious, bought with the rancid fat stored in her chest. It allows her to add a few more yards to her cop of yarn, a few more potential pennies. The light isn't for comfort, it's for productivity, for solvency, for pushing back the encroaching vulnerability of darkness. When the rushlight gutters out, leaving only the dull red ember of the hearth, she might light the tallow candle for another precious half hour. The fish oil variant makes her cough, but the slightly better light lets her mend a tear in her cloak, her fingers moving by feel as much as sight. The smoke curls towards the thatch, adding another layer to the centuries of grime. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, her small, smoky, smelly beacon holds its ground. It's a tiny victory against the night, powered by animal fat and sheer necessity. The chest provided the tools. Her endurance provided the flame. The scrape of her knife trimming the wick is the sound of time being carefully, frugally managed, one smoky minute at a time. Section 12. The greasy tang of tallow smoke still hangs in the air, but as you shift past the bundled rushlights and lumpy candles, your fingers encounter something different, smaller, more intimate. Not tools, not textiles, but fragments of self. Nestled in a fold of linen or tucked into a carved wooden box no larger than your palm lie the widow's personal belongings. A bone comb, a simple brooch, perhaps a worn ring or a string of glass beads. These aren't necessities for survival. They're whispers of identity in a world that often reduced women to roles: wife, mother, widow. In the chest's pragmatic depths, these tiny treasures are islands of individuality. Mainstream history confirms that even peasant women owned small personal items, though their materials were humble. Combs were ubiquitous, essential for hygiene and lice removal, a constant battle, typically carved from bone, antler, or dense wood-like boxwood. Jewelry was sparse but significant: brooches, fibulae, to fasten cloaks, rings of base metal, glass beads, or pilgrim badges sewn onto garments. For the widow, these weren't frivolous decorations. They were tangible links to her past, a betrothal gift, a memento from a fair, proof she'd once journeyed to a distant shrine. In widowhood, wearing them asserted, "I am still here, more than my loss." Now, for a quirky, oddly specific superstition clinging to one such item, the thief-deterring knot. A simple necklace of beads or a woven cord might be deliberately knotted in a complex, almost Gordian tangle before being placed in the chest. This wasn't carelessness, it was folk magic. Belief held that a thief attempting to steal the item would be compelled to stop and untie the knot, wasting time or inviting discovery. Some knots were even whispered over with charms like, "Tangle his fingers, fog his eyes, till my treasure he spies no more." Imagine a widow carefully knotting her one string of beads, a tiny, twisted guardian against greedy hands. But historians still fiercely debate whether these personal items reflected genuine personal taste or merely social obligation. Was a carved bone comb chosen because its pattern pleased the bride, or was it the cheapest option at the market? Did a woman wear a pewter brooch shaped like a dove because she found it beautiful, or because doves symbolized fidelity expected of wives? Some scholars argue that in rigidly hierarchical societies, adornment primarily signaled marital status, piety, via pilgrim badges, or family allegiance. Others find hints of personal agency in regional variations, distinctive brooch styles in coastal villages versus inland hamlets, suggesting women exercised subtle choice within constraints. Was the chest a gallery of conformity, or a hidden cabinet of quiet self-expression? The artifacts, mute in museums, offer no definitive answer. Feel the comb first. Pick it up. It's cool, smooth bone, yellowish with age, about the length of your finger. One side has coarse, widely spaced teeth for dragging through tangled, lice-ridden hair. The other has finer teeth, for smoothing and styling. Run your thumb over the teeth. They're slightly uneven, hand-carved. The top might be carved with simple geometric patterns, circles, zigzags, worn faint by years of handling. It smells faintly of old bone and the ghost of hair oils, rancid butter or herbal infusions used to condition hopelessly knotted medieval hair. This comb has scraped against countless scalps, witnessed private moments of grooming, been dropped in rushes and retrieved. Now the brooch. Perhaps a simple disc brooch, tin or pewter, its surface dulled. A pin on the back, slightly bent. It feels light, insubstantial compared to the iron cookpot. Or maybe it's a penannular type, a partial ring with pin, crafted from bronze, a step up in status. It might bear a faint etched design, a cross, a stylized animal, interlaced patterns echoing Celtic knots. Cool metal against your palm. No gemstones, no gold. Such things belong to nobles, locked away in castles, not tucked into peasant chests. This brooch clasped her woolen cloak daily, holding her armor against the wind. Its value isn't material, it's associative. Unfastening it each night was a small ritual of safety, of coming home. Consider the contrast. Imagine lifting a noblewoman's brooch for a second. Heavy silver, maybe niello inlay, a garnet winking dully. It speaks of wealth, alliances, conspicuous consumption. Her brooch, in contrast, whispers resourcefulness. A peasant widow's beads might be rough blue glass, traded for eggs at a market, strung on gut. A noblewoman's necklace would be amber from the Baltic, pearls from the East. The widow's trinkets aren't investments, they're emotional ballast. A pilgrim badge, a tiny, crudely cast lead token depicting Saint Anne or a scallop shell for St. James, isn't just decoration. It's proof of a journey undertaken, faith demonstrated, a tangible connection to the divine she might desperately need. It smells of sweat, road dust, and candle wax from the shrine where it was touched to relics. Witness the placement in the chest. These items aren't buried under grain sacks. They're often near the top, wrapped in a scrap of soft linen for protection, easily accessible. The comb might be tucked beside the spindle, the brooch pinned inside a folded shift. During the loading, they might have drawn less scrutiny than the linens or woolens, mere personal trifles. Yet their inclusion was vital. The bride's mother might slip in a small, smooth river stone her daughter had carried since childhood, a touchstone for comfort. A widow's identity wasn't erased. It was folded carefully into the oak repository of her future. Now, Picture her alone, years later. She opens the chest not for wool or grain, but for this small box. She lifts the comb. The familiar weight, the smoothness. She draws it through her grey-streaked hair, the coarse teeth catching snarls, the fine teeth smoothing. It's an act of reclaiming her body from drudgery. She pins the brooch onto her worn cloak. The dull metal doesn't gleam, but its presence is a touchstone. This belonged to me before I was his wife. This belongs to me still. She fingers the pilgrim badge, remembering the aching feet, the chanting crowds, the fleeting sense of being part of something vast. These objects aren't valuable. They're priceless. They anchor her to the woman she was before widowhood defined her. And the humor. Oh, it's there. Imagine that comb's history. It survived being sat on, dropped in chamber pots, probably, used to scratch a stubborn itch on a cow's back in a moment of sheer desperation. That brooch? It's pinned shut the cloak she wore while gutting fish, its surface etched not just by design, but by fish scales and salt spray. The pilgrim badge might have fallen off during a frantic dash from a downpour and been retrieved from a puddle. These weren't heirlooms kept under glass. They were working-class bling, battered companions in life's messy slog. Their survival in the chest is a minor miracle, like finding a decent avocado at the back of the fridge after a month. The widow closes the small box, the personal treasures hidden again. The comb lies beside her spindle, ready for use. The brooch is pinned. She carries these fragments of herself into her solitary days. They don't fill her belly or warm her bones, but they mend something less tangible. In a world demanding she be only the widow, the bone comb, the tin brooch, the knotted beads whisper back, "Remember me? I'm still here too." The scrape of the comb through her hair joins the rhythm of the spindle, a quiet soundtrack to her enduring, multifaceted self. The chest holds her survival. These trinkets hold her soul. Section 13. The cool touch of bone and metal fades, replaced by something smoother, more pliable beneath your fingers. Parchment. Leather bindings. Small, hard objects struck with crude, meaningful images. You've moved past worldly possessions into the realm of faith and spiritual armor, the sacred safeguards. Tucked beside the spindle or nestled within folded shifts, these are the widow's bulwark against forces far more terrifying than cold or hunger, the unseen perils of illness, malice, and the ever-present shadow of damnation. Forget grand cathedral relics. This is personal piety, portable and potent. Mainstream history confirms the deep integration of religion and folk belief in medieval daily life. For the widow, isolated and vulnerable, sacred objects weren't optional extras. They were essential psychological and social tools. Key items included simple books of hours or psalters, if she was literate or could afford one, inscribed prayer cards or lead amulets bearing protective texts, like the names of the three kings or snippets of gospel, pilgrim badges, tin, lead, or occasionally pewter tokens bought at shrines, and occasionally a small wooden rosary or paternoster beads. These weren't just reminders of faith. They were believed to wield active protective power, warding off evil spirits, disease, and misfortune through divine intercession. Now, for a quirky, borderline blasphemous practice tied to pilgrim badges, rat-repelling relics. Some widows, particularly in rural areas, would pin pilgrim badges, especially those depicting Saint Gertrude of Nivelles, patron saint of cats and, by extension, enemies of rodents, not just to their clothes for spiritual protection, but specifically onto grain sacks inside the chest. Folk belief held the saint's image, having touched holy relics at a shrine, emitted an aura that repelled vermin. It was divine pest control. Imagine a tiny, crudely cast lead badge of Gertrude, pinned to a sack of barley, silently commanding rats. Not this grain, by the power of Nivelles. Faith and famine prevention, hand in hand. But historians still fiercely debate the literacy levels and actual usage of religious texts in these chests. Could a typical Breton peasant widow read her book of hours? Unlikely. Was a psalter merely a status symbol? A beautiful object whose Latin text was incomprehensible but whose presence signaled piety and wealth? Or did she use it devotionally in other ways, kissing the images, tracing the letters with a finger while reciting memorized prayers, believing the physical book amplified her petitions? Some scholars argue these books were primarily for the priests who might visit her deathbed. Others suggest women learned specific prayers phonetically, using the book as a sacred focal point. Was the book a tool, a talisman, or a costly security blanket for the soul? The worn pages hold silent testimony. Feel the prayer card first. Stiff parchment, perhaps slightly greasy from handling, the edges softened with age. On one side, a crude woodcut print, the Virgin Mary, sorrowful and pale, or Saint Christopher bearing the Christ child across turbulent waters. The lines are thick, simple, the colors, if any, faded washes of ochre, blue, or red. Flip it over. On the back, in spidery ink, a prayer in Latin or perhaps the local Breton dialect. Sanct Michael Archangel, defend numbers in proelio. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Run your thumb over the indented letters. It feels like whispered pleas made solid. It smells faintly of incense, candle smoke, and the sweat of anxious palms. Now the pilgrim badge. Pick up a scallop shell, the symbol of St. James of Compostela. It's cold, thin lead, slightly rough around the edges where it was snapped off its casting sprue. It weighs almost nothing. The details are crude, radiating lines for the shell, perhaps a tiny cross. Or maybe it's the key of St. Peter, or the flask of St. Mina's. One side might be slightly convex from being pressed against the shrine's relics. It has a loop for sewing onto a hat or cloak. It feels insignificant, yet charged with the energy of distant journeys, vast crowds, fervent hope. It smells of dust, road grime, and the metallic tang of the lead itself. Consider the Book of Hours. If she possesses one, it's a treasure. The leather binding is worn smooth, darkened by generations of touch. The metal clasp is simple iron, perhaps slightly rusted. Open it carefully. The parchment pages rustle, thick and creamy. The script is dense, black Latin, beautifully formed by a scribe's hand, incomprehensible words holding fathomless power. But the margins. Here's the accessible part. Tiny, vivid illuminations. A kneeling woman in a blue gown, the widow herself, perhaps. A grotesque devil being speared by an angel, bunches of flowers, whimsical beasts in the borders. These pictures are her scripture. She traces the Virgin's blue robe with a reverent finger, finding solace in color and form where words fail. The book smells overwhelmingly of old parchment, leather, and a faint, lingering sweetness from the gum used in the illuminations. It's heavy with sanctity. Witness the placement. These sacred items aren't relegated to the bottom. The prayer card might be tucked into the very first fold of her best shift, resting over her heart. The pilgrim badges are sewn onto the inside of the chest lid, gazing down protectively on the contents, or pinned to the woolen cloak itself. The Book of Hours, if she has it, rests wrapped in clean linen near the documents, close to the legal proof, but separate, holier. During the chest loading, the priest might have blessed the items, or the bride's grandmother murmured prayers over them. Their inclusion wasn't questioned. It was as essential as the grain or the cookpot. Faith was woven into the fabric of security. Now, imagine the widow in crisis. A fever grips her. The cottage feels thick with unseen menace. She fumbles in the chest, past the practical layers. Her fingers find the prayer card. She clutches it, the stiff parchment digging into her palm. She presses it to her burning forehead, whispering the memorized words against the Latin script she cannot read. Libera me, Domin. Deliver me, O Lord. The familiar feel, the smell of incense trapped in the fibers, is a comfort. It's a lifeline thrown to heaven. Or a storm rages, wind screaming like damned souls around the cottage. She lights a precious tallow candle, not fish oil tonight. Beside her Book of Hours. She doesn't read. She turns to the image of Saint Christopher, massive and steady, carrying the child through the tempest. She stares at the picture, willing his strength into her trembling hands. The candle gutters, casting the saint's image into flickering, monstrous life on the wall. Is it protection, or a reminder of the world's terrifying power? She doesn't know. She holds onto the image. And the rat-repelling Saint Gertrude? When she retrieves her grain sack months later, she checks the pinned badge. No gnaw holes. A tiny surge of relief. Was it the saint, or just a well-sealed chest? Does it matter? The badge did its job. Faith, in this instance, had tangible results. She touches the crude lead image, a tiny shield against chaos, both spiritual and verminous. The sacred safeguards offered no guarantees. Prayers didn't always cure fevers. Saint Christopher didn't stop every storm. Rats sometimes ignored Saint Gertrude. Yet, their power lay in the belief and the ritual. Holding the prayer card focused fear into a plea. Gazing at the illumination provided a focal point amidst panic. The pilgrim badge was a tangible connection to a wider world of faith, proof she wasn't entirely alone. They were psychological tools, forged in the fires of doctrine and superstition, wielded against the vast, terrifying uncertainties of a medieval life, uncertainties amplified tenfold by widowhood. The widow closes the Book of Hours, the heavy covers thudding softly. She pins the prayer card back inside her shift. The pilgrim badges watch from the lid. The scent of parchment and old incense mingles with wood smoke and damp wool. These objects don't fill her belly or spin her wool, but they fortify the fortress within. They are her whispered conversations with the divine, her charms against the dark, her fragile bridges over the abyss of despair. The scrape of her spindle continues, a mundane counterpoint to the silent vigil of the saints in her chest. The oak held her goods, faith, however defined, held her hope. Section 14. The comforting weight of the prayer book, the cool touch of the pilgrim badge, these spiritual anchors give way to something far more brittle, yet infinitely more powerful in the temporal world. Your fingers brush against rolled parchment, tied with faded ribbon. Stiffer documents, perhaps sealed with blobs of red or brown wax, some cracked with age. This is the bedrock of the widow's independence, the layer that transforms hopeful preparation into enforceable right, the essential documents. Beneath the linens, woolens, tools, and trinkets lies the cold, hard proof. Forget faith, this is the law. The mainstream historical fact underpinning this layer is the critical importance of written records in medieval property disputes, especially within Brittany's unique customary law framework. While oral testimony and community memory held weight, a written document, a marriage contract, a land deed, a charter confirming dower rights, was the gold standard of proof. For the widow, possessing the original or a properly witnessed copy of these documents within her chest was non-negotiable. They were her sword and shield against grasping in-laws, opportunistic lords, or even her own children seeking an early inheritance. Without them, her claim to the chest's contents, her house, her parcel of land, could evaporate like mist off the moors. Now, for a quirky, tension-breaking ritual tied to the signing, witness wine. After the crucial signatures were scrawled and the wax seals affixed, it wasn't uncommon for the notary or scribe to produce a special flask of wine, often spiced and sweetened, a small luxury. Each witness, and sometimes the principals involved, would take a symbolic sip directly after touching their lips to the still damp wax seal on the document. This act wasn't just celebration, it was binding magic. Folk belief held that sharing wine over the seal intertwined the fates of the signatories with the truth of the document. Breaking the agreement would curse the oath-breaker with the wine turning sour in their belly, a potent, visceral deterrent in a superstitious age. Imagine the nervous gulp, the sweet wine mingling with the taste of beeswax and ink. But historians still fiercely debate the literacy levels required and the vulnerability inherent in these documents. Could the widow read her own marriage contract or land deed? Almost certainly not. She relied entirely on the word of the notary who read it aloud during signing and the integrity of the witnesses. This created a terrifying vulnerability. Was the contract read accurately? Did it truly reflect the terms negotiated? An unscrupulous notary or influential witness could perpetrate a devastating fraud. Some scholars argue the ritualistic nature of signing, the presence of community witnesses, the sealing, the witness wine, provided psychological and social safeguards against outright forgery. Others point to numerous court cases where widows alleged misrepresentation, suggesting the system was far from foolproof. Was her security parchment deep, reliant on the honesty of men she couldn't fully understand or challenge? Feel the documents now. Unroll a marriage contract. The parchment is stiff, slightly yellowed at the edges, smelling of animal skin, oak gall ink, and dust. The writing is dense, sprawling, a professional scribe's formal hand, but the Latin or legal French is an impenetrable forest of loops and abbreviations to untrained eyes. Your fingers trace the jagged edge where it was cut from a larger skin. Feel the raised bumps of the wax seals, hard and brittle now, some bearing the crude impression of a signet ring, a merchant's mark, perhaps, or a local lord's simplified crest. The ribbon tying it is frayed, its color faded from crimson to a rusty pink. This isn't just paper, it's compressed history, potential energy stored in ink and skin. Now a land deed. Smaller, perhaps, but heavier with implication. It details a specific plot, bounded on the east by the oak called La Vieuse, on the west by the stream known as La Douve, south by the holding of Guillaume Le Goff, north by the common pasture. These weren't abstract coordinates, they were landmarks known to every villager. The parchment might bear multiple seals, the lord who granted it, the local bailiff, the priest as a moral witness. The ink might be faded brown in places, the parchment stained by a long-ago drop of rain or wine. It feels like a tiny, fragile map to her future sustenance. Consider the sheer power concentrated here. This rolled parchment, nestled beside her spare shift, holds the key to her house, her vegetable plot, her right to glean in the Lord's fields after harvest, her claim to a share of the mill's output. Its loss or destruction would be catastrophic. Fire was a constant terror. Damp could blur ink into illegibility. Mice might nibble the edges. And then there was human malice, a disgruntled brother-in-law misplacing it, a greedy bailiff confiscating it for verification never to return it. The chest, with its iron straps and stout oak, was its fortress. Witness the reverence during placement. These documents aren't casually tossed in. They are handled with near-religious care. The marriage contract, tightly rolled, might be slipped into a sewn leather tube or wrapped in the cleanest, softest linen available. The land deed, similarly protected. They are placed deep within the chest, often centrally, surrounded by softer items like woolens or bedding for cushioning, yet accessible enough to retrieve if needed. During the loading, the notary himself might place them, intoning a final reminder of their paramount importance. The groom's representatives watch silently. Challenging the placement of the cookpot is one thing, questioning the sanctity of the documents is another. Their presence in her chest, under her control, or her designated guardians if she was deemed incapable, is the crux of the entire system. Imagine the widow, years later. The dreaded moment arrives. Her husband lies cold. The burial rites are done. Now comes the real test. Relatives gather, their expressions a mix of sympathy and sharp calculation. The bailiff or lord steward arrives, ledger in hand. The air in the cottage is thick with unspoken tension. She walks to the chest. Her hands, perhaps trembling slightly, move past the layers, the linen smelling faintly of herbs, the heavy woolens, the familiar tools. Her fingers find the leather tube or the linen-wrapped bundle. She draws it out. The brittle parchment crackles ominously in the silence. She unrolls it carefully, the wax seals snapping faintly. She presents it, not to the bailiff first, but perhaps to the village priest or respected elder, someone who can read. The Latin words echo in the still room, translating the dense script into Breton or French. They confirm her dower portion, the house for her lifetime, the south field, the right to 6 bushels of rye annually from the common store, the contents of this chest. Each clause is a brick relayed in the wall of her security. You see the subtle deflation in the shoulders of a hopeful nephew. The bailiff nods, makes a note in his ledger. The document, held aloft in the dim light, is her victory banner. It is the physical manifestation of the law, invoked and proven. The chest did its job, the fortress preserved the ultimate weapon. But the vulnerability lingers. As she re-rolls the precious parchment, binding it with the frayed ribbon, she knows this battle is won, but the war is ongoing. Taxes will be demanded, based on that deed. Boundaries might be forgotten by neighbors. The parchment is powerful, but it is also fragile. Its continued existence, its legibility, is her lifeline. She places it back in its wrappings, deep within the chest, beneath layers of tangible security. She closes the heavy lid. The thud is the sound of a portcullis slamming shut. The essential documents are the silent, brittle generals of her independence. They command no armies, but their authority, etched in ink and sealed in wax, is absolute within the sphere they govern. They speak the language of courts and lords, a language she cannot utter but whose power she harnesses. They transform the wool, the grain, the tools, and even the pilgrim badges from mere possessions into legally sanctioned property. The chest holds her past labor and future sustenance. These parchments hold the key that unlocks their true purpose. The scrape of her spindle resumes, but the most potent sound in the cottage is the brittle whisper of parchment settling back into its linen shroud, waiting, always waiting, for the day it must speak for her again. Section 15. The smooth, authoritative bulk of the document settles back into its linen shroud, but your exploration of the chest's depths isn't quite finished. Your fingers, trained by layers of wool, wood, and parchment, now trace the interior surfaces with a different intent. Along the grain of the thick oak sides, across the seemingly solid bottom board, inside the heavy lid itself, you search for anomalies. A faint ridge where none should be. A tiny, discolored knot. A section of wood that feels subtly different under your touch. This is the realm of whispers and possibilities, the hidden compartments. Did our widow's independence chest hold secrets within its secrets? Mainstream historical evidence confirms that concealed compartments were a feature of some medieval furniture, particularly coffers and chests belonging to merchants, nobles, or institutions like churches for safeguarding small valuables or sensitive documents. Craftsmen like Jan possessed the skills. False bottoms ingeniously fitted, panels that slid aside with pressure on a disguised latch, hollowed-out legs, or compartments accessed only by removing a series of pegs in a specific order. For a widow, the potential applications are tantalizing. A stash of coins saved penny by penny over years, a piece of jewelry too precious to display, a private letter, a second copy of the marriage contract, or even a tiny relic for extra protection. In a world where her primary security was semi-public knowledge, the chest's existence, the contract, a hidden space offered pure, private insurance. Now, for a quirky, almost paranoid method rumored to detect such compartments, the singing grain. Suspicious individuals, perhaps a widow checking her own chest after a carpenter's visit, or an heir snooping later, might pour a thin layer of dried peas, millet, or fine sand across the bottom of the chest or along suspect seams. Then, they'd tap the outside walls rhythmically with a knuckle. The theory. Loose grains over a hollow space would vibrate differently, producing a distinct, slightly higher-pitched singing or buzzing sound compared to the dull thud over solid wood. Imagine a widow, late at night, quietly pouring millet into her chest, then tapping like a woodpecker, ear pressed to the side, listening for the telltale hum of hidden space. Security through resonant serial. But historians still fiercely debate the prevalence and primary purpose of hidden compartments, specifically in widows' independence chests. Were they a common feature, or a rare luxury? Some scholars argue they were relatively widespread, especially in chests commissioned by wealthier families or in regions with particularly predatory inheritance customs. They point to surviving chests with ingenious mechanisms and suggest the extra cost was justified for absolute security. Others contend they were exceptional, citing the added complexity and expense, and the fact that most widow disputes centered on the known contents protected by law, not undiscovered caches. More critically, were these spaces primarily for safeguarding extra wealth, or for hiding the widow's core assets from immediate confiscation if her legal position was initially challenged? Was it a bonus vault, or a panic room for her most vital reserves? The wood, even when hollow, offers no confession. Feel the search now. Run your fingertips slowly, deliberately, along the inside of the chest. The oak is smooth from years of linen sliding across it, but is it uniformly smooth? Press firmly near a corner joint. Does the wood yield slightly, revealing a hairline seam invisible to the eye? Examine the bottom. Is one plank slightly thicker? Does it sit too perfectly flush, suggesting it might lift out? Tap gently with a knuckle. Thunk, 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 thunk. Listen. Is there a subtle difference in resonance? A slightly hollow echo behind the solid thud? The air is still. You hold your breath. Your senses strain against the wood's stoic silence. Is that a faint vibration under your fingertips, or just your pulse? Consider the mechanisms. If it exists, how is it opened? Perhaps a specific knot on the exterior panel needs to be pressed hard while simultaneously lifting a corner of the bottom board. Maybe a sequence of taps on seemingly random points of the lid's underside releases a small spring-loaded catch. Or perhaps a decorative iron strap has a section that pivots, revealing a keyhole for a minuscule, separate key. The ingenuity is a testament to the carpenter's skill and the client's desire for absolute secrecy. It transforms the chest from a strongbox into a puzzle box. The widow, and perhaps only her most trusted confidant, a sister, her mother, knew the trick. It was knowledge as valuable as the hidden item itself. Imagine the carpenter, Jan, near the end of his work on the chest. The iron straps are fixed, the lock is installed. The families are due for the loading tomorrow. Under the guise of a final polish, he works alone in the fading light. With delicate chisels and fine augers, he works on a section of the bottom, crafting a thin false panel. He tests the hidden latch, a smooth slide, a barely audible click. Satisfied, he reassembles it perfectly. He sweeps the telltale shavings into the hearth fire. He doesn't note it on the bill. This is off-the-books craftsmanship, a secret service for an extra fee, or perhaps a personal safeguard for a daughter of the village he's known since birth. His expression is unreadable. The chest now holds two futures, the public one defined by the contract, and a private one known only to her. Witness the potential contents. Suppose she uses it. A small leather pouch, greasy with handling, containing silver pennies and a few tiny gold coins, her flight fund, painstakingly saved from egg sales or secret spinning commissions, hidden even from her husband. A delicate silver ring, an heirloom from her grandmother, too fine for daily wear in a fisherman's cottage. A folded letter, brittle with age, perhaps a youthful love note or instructions from her mother, words meant for her eyes only. A second, smaller copy of the land deed, rolled tight and sealed, a backup in case the primary was lost. Or maybe just a smooth, Warrior stone, warmed by generations of anxious hands. These aren't just objects, they're fragments of a self held apart from the roles of wife and widow, a core identity preserved in oaken secrecy. Now, picture the widow in crisis, before the legal documents need to be produced. Rumors fly that her husband's brother plans to contest the will at the local court. He's been seen talking to the bailiff. Anxiety knots her stomach. She waits for deep night. The cottage is silent. She moves the chest slightly, a grunt of effort. She kneels. Her fingers, trembling but sure, find the sequence. A press here, a slide there, a twist. A faint click. A small section of the bottom lifts silently. Inside, the familiar pouch. She doesn't count the coins. She feels their weight. Just knowing it's there, untouched, is a surge of strength. The hidden compartment isn't about spending. It's about the visceral reassurance of having a secret weapon, a last line of defense utterly beyond anyone's reach or knowledge. She closes it. The wood sighs back into perfect alignment. The secret is safe. Her breathing steadies. But what if she never used it? Imagine the compartment lying dormant for decades, forgotten even by her. Years after her death, the chest passes to a granddaughter. During cleaning, a curious hand taps an odd spot. The millet trick? A loose floorboard reveals the hidden space. Inside, dust. A dried spider. A single, tarnished penny. Or perhaps nothing at all. The promise of secrecy remains, but the secret itself is gone, leaving only the ghost of a precaution and the carpenter's cleverness echoing in empty wood. The existence of a hidden compartment speaks volumes about the underlying fear. The legal documents were powerful, but they existed within a system vulnerable to corruption, loss, or force. The hidden space operated outside that system. It was pure, personal sovereignty carved into the very structure of her security. It acknowledged that even the oak fortress and the inked contract might not be enough. It was a whisper of rebellion against total exposure, a final, private corner in a world that sought to define and claim her entirely. Your fingers rest on the smooth wood, the search concluded. Found or not, the possibility lingers. The chest feels deeper, more complex. It holds linens, tools, documents, faith, identity, and now, perhaps, the silent potential of absolute secrecy. The widow's independence wasn't just declared by the weight of her possessions. It might also have been whispered in the clever hollows only she knew. The scrape of her spindle continues, a steady rhythm over the profound silence of the wood, holding its secrets close, just like the woman who owned it. Section 16. For years, perhaps decades, the chest has sat a familiar, heavy presence by the hearth. A repository of scratchy woolens and smooth linens, of clanking pots and whispering parchments. A promise locked in oak. Its true purpose remained latent, potential energy coiled tight. But now the air in the cottage changes. The rhythmic scrape of the carding wool has stopped. The fire burns low, unattended. The silence isn't peaceful. It's thick, suffocating, broken only by the ragged breaths of the woman sitting rigidly beside the cold hearth. The event the chest was built for has arrived. The husband is dead. Mainstream history is brutally clear. The husband's death was the immediate, irrevocable trigger for the widow's chest to transition from storage to survival kit. Breton customary law, unlike some stricter systems elsewhere, generally allowed the widow to remain in the marital home, her dower house, and retain control of her designated portion of the movable goods without immediate interference, provided she could produce the documents proving her claim. The chest ceased to be just a box. It became her legal shield and economic engine. Its activation wasn't symbolic. It was procedural and profoundly practical. The moment breath left her husband's body, the lock on that chest became the lock on her future. Now, for a quirky, morbidly practical custom tied to this transition, shroud verification. Before the body was even cold, or certainly before burial, a trusted female neighbor or relative, sometimes the priest's wife, might discreetly check the chest's linen layer. Why? To ensure the widow wasn't forced to use her precious, contractual guaranteed sheets or shifts for the death shroud, a significant expense and loss of valuable assets. Often, a coarser, older sheet kept outside the chest, or one provided by the church, was used instead. The neighbor's quiet confirmation, the chest linens are untouched, was a small, crucial act of solidarity, protecting the widow's resources at her most vulnerable moment. Imagine the whispered exchange, the swift lift of the lid, the assessing glance, the nod. Security extended to the very fabric of death. But historians still fiercely debate the widow's immediate emotional state versus procedural necessity. Was she paralyzed by grief, reliant on others to initiate the chest's unlocking? Or did grim practicality override shock, driving her straight to the oak fortress to secure her claim before the vultures circled? Some scholars paint a picture of stunned inertia, the chest being opened by male relatives or the notary according to legal protocol, the widow a passive spectator to her own security being enacted. Others argue that the years of preparation, the constant presence of the chest, ingrained a powerful self-preservation instinct. Facing destitution, she might have moved with desperate clarity, retrieving the key or demonstrating the hidden latch sequence herself. The physical act of opening the chest a first step in asserting her new, solitary identity. Was the first touch of the key cold duty, or the first spark of defiant selfhood? Feel the weight of the moment. The cottage smells of tallow smoke, damp wool, and the faint, sweet rot scent of illness that has finally won. The body lies still on the straw mattress. The initial flurry, fetching the priest, washing the body, neighbors arriving with murmured condolences, has subsided into a numb quiet. The widow sits. Her hands are clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Her gaze isn't on the body, it's fixed on the chest. The promise looms, suddenly monstrous in its immediacy. The comfortable rhythm of scrape is replaced by the pounding of her own heart. Here the sounds shift. The low murmur of prayers from the priest. The shuffling feet of neighbors bringing simple offerings of bread or ale. The rasp of a saw as someone builds a coffin rough box outside. And cutting through it, perhaps, the decisive click of the lock. Did her own hand turn the key? Did her brother, present as her legal protector, step forward? Or did the village elder, knowing the law, gently prompt her? The heavy lid creaks open. The familiar scents of stored linen, herbs, and parchment rise into the grief-thick air. It smells like the future, suddenly terrifyingly real. Witness the first retrieval. It might not be the documents yet. It might be wool. Heavy, practical black wool. She needs mourning clothes. Quickly. Not for fashion, but for social expectation, a visible signal of her changed status, a deterrent to inappropriate advances, a mark of respect. Her fingers, cold and stiff, pull out the darkest, coarsest cloak or tunic from the woolen layer. The texture is harsh against her skin, mirroring her inner state. She drapes it over her everyday clothes. The transformation is instant. Wife becomes widow. The chest provides the uniform of her new reality. Or perhaps it's the documents. The linen-wrapped bundle is drawn out. The wax seals feel brittle, fragile. She doesn't unroll them yet. She simply holds them. Their physical weight is negligible, but their symbolic weight is crushing. They are her sword and shield, but wielding them requires strength she isn't sure she possesses. Holding them is an act of faith, a reminder that foresight has built her a bulwark. She clutches them to her chest, beneath the scratchy wool. Proof pressed against a breaking heart. Consider the legal clock now ticking. While Bretoncustoms offered some breathing space, formalities couldn't wait forever. The husband's death needed to be recorded in the parish register. The Lord's bailiff needed notification. Death meant a potential change in tenancy, inheritance dues, recalculation of taxes. The widow's dower rights needed formal recognition, often requiring a court appearance or at least the presentation of the marriage contract to the local authority. The chest's contents, especially the documents, were her passport through this bureaucratic gauntlet. Every moment the chest remained unopened was a moment her position was vulnerable. Imagine the widow, the day after the burial. The neighbors have gone home. The silence is absolute, deafening. The hearth is cold. She is truly alone. She walks to the chest. This time, no audience. She kneels. Her hand doesn't tremble now. She turns the key, or performs the sequence. The lid opens. She looks inside, not at the layers, but at the totality. Her linens, her pots, her spindle, her grain, her proof. This is her world now, contained within oak walls. She takes a deep breath, inhaling the scent of security she helped build. The grief is still a physical ache, a stone in her chest. But beneath it, kindled by the sight of her assembled fortress, is a spark. Not joy, not yet. Resolve. The grim understanding that survival is now her sole occupation. The chest is open. The independence it promised is no longer potential. It is her present, her burden, her only path forward. She reaches in, perhaps for the distaff and spindle. The familiar tools. Her fingers find the rhythm almost automatically. Draw, twist, wind. The whir of the spindle breaks the silence. It's a tiny sound, insignificant against the void left by death. But it is her sound. It's the sound of continuity, of work, of income, of defiance. The wool is coarse, the spindle heavy, but the motion is life. She spins not just thread, but the first fragile strands of her widow's future. The chest sits open beside her, its contents no longer dormant promises, but active tools in the daily battle she now wages alone. The scrape is gone, replaced by the whir hum of the spindle, a new rhythm for a harsh new reality. The fortress is breached, not by enemies, but by necessity. Its treasures are deployed. The widow's independence has begun. Section 17. The spindle's whir hum is a fragile thread of normalcy, but it can't drown out the approaching storm. You hear it first in the heavy footsteps outside, the too loud clearing of a throat, the murmur of voices that aren't neighbors bringing condolence bread. The door, ill-fitting in its frame, creaks open without the courtesy of a knock. Shadows fall across the widow's spinning, her brother-in-law, perhaps, flanked by a cousin or two. Their expressions hold a veneer of sympathy, stretched thin over sharp calculation. The air, already thick with grief and wood smoke, crackles with a new tension. The vultures have landed. The chest's first true test as a legal shield begins. Mainstream history documents the pervasive risk widows faced from male relatives seeking to reclaim family property. Under systems like primogeniture, land typically passed to the eldest son, but movable goods, the contents of the chest, were often seen as fair game by brothers, nephews, or even sons impatient for their full inheritance. Breton customary law offered protection, but it wasn't automatic magic. It had to be invoked and proven. The widow's chest, specifically its documents and the witnessed inventory of its contents, was her primary defense against this predatory kinship tax. Producing the marriage contract wasn't just administrative. It was a declaration of war fought with parchment and ink. Now, for a quirky, community-driven tactic used to bolster her position, oath loaves. When disputes arose, before escalating to costly court, the widow might present her claim publicly, perhaps at the church door after Mass. To add visceral weight to her words, she'd sometimes bring small, specially blessed loaves of bread. Anyone supporting her claim, neighbors who witnessed the chest loading, women who knew the items were hers, would physically touch these loaves while affirming her truth under oath. Folk belief held that lying while touching this consecrated bread invited divine retribution, a bellyache from heaven, or worse. Imagine the widow standing firm, holding out a humble loaf, as her allies step forward, place a hand on the bread, and declare, I saw the 6 pairs of sheets placed in her chest by her mother's own hand. It was edible evidence and divine deterrent rolled into one. But historians still fiercely debate the effectiveness of this legal shield across social strata. Did a wealthy merchant's widow, with a detailed contract drafted by a town notary and powerful connections, face the same intensity of challenge as a poor fisherman's widow relying on a simpler agreement and the memory of illiterate villagers? Some scholars argue Breton custom was robust enough to protect most widows who could produce any proof. Others point to court records showing poorer widows frequently pressured into surrendering items or accepting unfavorable settlements due to intimidation, lack of resources to pursue litigation, or the sheer exhaustion of fighting male relatives backed by community bias. Was a chest an impenetrable fortress, or merely sturdy walls that determined, and well-connected, assailants could eventually scale or undermine? The truth likely lay in the grim grey area between. Feel the confrontation. The brother-in-law, Gooey, plants his feet wide, blocking the weak light from the door. He smells of damp earth and sour ale. A sad day, sister, he begins, his voice unctuous. A heavy burden for you now. We've come to ease it. His eyes flick past her to the chest, its lid closed but no longer just furniture. That fine copper pot, for instance, belonged to our mother, didn't it? Passed to Mark. Makes sense it comes back to the family now. His cousin nods, a silent, hulking echo. The widow doesn't rise. Her fingers, resting on the spindle shaft, are steady. She meets Gooey's gaze. The scratchy wool of her mourning cloak itches fiercely. The pot, she says, her voice low but clear, is listed in my contract. Page 2. Witnessed by Father Male and your own father. Rest him. She doesn't gesture to the chest yet. She names the proof. Gooey waves a dismissive hand. Old papers. Misunderstandings. Mark wouldn't want you struggling, weighed down with things better suited to a full household. He takes a step closer. The implicit threat hovers, not violence, perhaps, but relentless pressure, gossip, making her life in the village untenable. Be reasonable. Let us help you manage what's rightly ours. This is the moment. The chest isn't just storage, it's a bunker. She stands, slowly. The movement draws their eyes. She walks to the chest, her back straight beneath the heavy wool. The key hangs on a cord around her neck, hidden. She draws it out. The metal is cold against her skin. She inserts it into the heavy lock. The clunk as it turns is loud in the tense silence. The lid creaks open. She doesn't rummage. She goes straight to the linen-wrapped bundle near the center. The parchment crackles as she unrolls it. The dense script is a forest of thorns to her, but the seals are unmistakable. The Lord's bailiff's mark, Father Male's cross, the rough impression of old Gooey's ring. She holds it up, turning it so the light catches the wax. The contract, she states. Signed. Sealed. Witnessed. My dower portion. The pot is mine. The linens are mine. The grain is mine. She points to a section, her finger unwavering. Read it. Or fetch Father Male to read it to you. Watch Gooey's face. The bluster falters. The physical presence of the document, the official seals, the named witnesses, some still alive, is a barrier he didn't expect her to raise so firmly. He can't simply wave it away. He glowers at the parchment as if it's a physical adversary. His cousin shifts uncomfortably. The air leaks out of their claim. This is where the oath loaves might come in. If they persist, muttering about mistakes or changed circumstances, she might declare, voice rising slightly, "Shall we take it to the provost? Or to the church door Sunday? I'll bake the loaves. Let the saints judge whose memory holds true." The mention of public oath-taking, divine consequence, and the potential shame of being proven a liar before the community is often the final deterrent. Gooey knows villagers saw the chest loaded. He knows his father's seal is on that document. The risk outweighs the reward of a used cooking pot. He forces a tight smile, a grimace really. "No need for that, sister. No need at all. We misunderstood. Just looking out for family, you see." He backs towards the door, his cousin following. "Times are hard. We thought, well, never mind. Keep your pot." The dismissal is laced with resentment, but the retreat is real. The door thuds shut behind them. The widow stands motionless for a moment, the contract still held aloft. Then, slowly, she lowers it. She re-rolls the precious parchment with meticulous care, fingers trembling only slightly now. The victory is cold comfort. It doesn't fill the silence left by her husband. It doesn't lessen the scratch of the wool. But it holds the line. The fortress held. She places the document back in its wrappings, deep within the chest. She closes the heavy lid. The thud echoes the slamming door. She turns the key, withdrawing it. The metal warms slightly in her palm. She tucks it back under her shift, against her skin. The encounter leaves a residue, not relief, but exhaustion. The legal shield worked, but it required her to stand firm, weaponizing parchment against flesh and blood pressure. It drained reserves she didn't know she had. She looks at the spindle, abandoned on the stool. The whirl has stopped spinning. The thread hangs loose. She walks back, picks it up. The familiar weight. She tucks the distaff under her arm, draws out a few fibers. She gives the spindle a sharp twist. Whir hum. The rhythm resumes. Draw, twist, wind. Each rotation is a tiny reassertion of control. Each yard of yarn spun is a thread woven back into the fabric of her independence, slightly thicker now for having been tested. The chest guarded her goods. Her courage guarded the chest. The shield held. The battle is won, but the war of solitude stretches before her, measured in spindle rotations and the relentless turning of days. The whir hum is the sound of a woman reclaiming her rhythm, one defiant twist at a time, behind walls of oak and law. Section 18. The whir hum of the spindle is no longer just a rhythm of solace. It's become the steady pulse of a small, fragile economy. The confrontation at the door recedes like a bad dream, leaving behind the gritty reality of solitude. The chest proved its worth as a legal shield, repelling the grasping hands of kin. But oak and parchment can't fill a belly or mend a leaking roof. Now, the chest's true function as an economic lifeline begins. Its contents must transform from stored potential into tangible survival. This isn't about hoarding. It's about the delicate, often heartbreaking, alchemy of converting wool, grain, and linen into coins, salt, and another winter's firewood. The mainstream historical reality is that medieval widows, particularly those without grown sons or substantial landholdings, relied heavily on the movable goods in their dower chests for income. They weren't passive pensioners. They were active participants in a local barter and cash economy. Selling surplus spun yarn or woven cloth at market, trading grain for essential goods, renting out spare bedding to travelers, if near a road, or even selling high-value items like a good cooking pot in dire need. These were common strategies. The chest wasn't just a repository. It was her working capital, her inventory. Its depletion was a slow bleeding of security, requiring constant replenishment through her labor, primarily spinning and weaving. Now, for a quirky, socially complex marketplace phenomenon, the widow's measure. In some Breton markets, specific stalls or itinerant traders were unofficially known to use slightly generous measures when dealing with recognized widows. A scoop of grain might be heaped a little higher, a length of linen measured with a thumb's breadth extra. This wasn't charity. It was a nuanced social contract. The trader gained a reputation for fairness and potentially divine favor, while the widow received a tiny, face-saving boost. It was discreet, deniable benevolence. Imagine the widow presenting her sack of barley, the trader pouring it into his official measure, then casually adding a small extra handful from his own pouch before pouring it back into her sack with a nod. No words exchanged. Just the quiet economics of community. But historians still fiercely debate the degree of exploitation widows faced in these transactions. Were they vulnerable targets for sharp traders offering rock-bottom prices for their yarn or linens, knowing they were desperate? Or did community norms and the widow's own network, other women, the parish priest, provide a protective buffer? Some scholars point to court cases where widows successfully sued traders for unfair dealing, suggesting legal recourse existed. Others argue the sheer time and cost of litigation made it impractical for most, forcing widows to accept disadvantageous bargains. Was the widow's measure a genuine safety net, or a token gesture masking a system rigged against the solitary and vulnerable? The scales of history remain unbalanced. Feel the weight of the first item chosen for sale. Perhaps it's a length of her finest bleached linen, woven years ago with her mother, saved for something special that never came. It's smooth, cool, smelling faintly of sunlight and lye. Folding it now isn't for storage, it's for presentation. Each careful crease feels like a small betrayal of that past hope. Or maybe it's a sack of barley, not the dregs, but good, plump grain. Hefting it, you feel its solid potential. It represents meals not eaten, a tightening of the belt. This sack isn't sustenance, it's currency. Market day dawns, grey and damp. The widow shoulders her burden, the linen bundle, the grain sack, perhaps a basket of eggs or a bundle of her best spun yarn. The walk to the nearest town or village crossroads market is long, the path muddy. She joins the stream of other smallholders, the air thick with the smell of damp wool, livestock, wood smoke, and anticipation. Her mourning cloak marks her, drawing glances, some sympathetic, some calculating. She finds a spot, perhaps near other women she knows by sight, spreading her wares on a scrap of sacking. The chest's bounty is now exposed to the world's appraisal. Hear the market's roar. Carters shouting, livestock lowing and squealing, the clang of a blacksmith nearby, the constant haggling buzz. A fishwife's piercing cry competes with a peddler hawking ribbons and pins. It's overwhelming, a sensory assault after the cottage's quiet. She stands beside her offerings, feeling exposed. This isn't the defensive posture by the hearth, this is open vulnerability. The first customer approaches. A stout housewife, fingers testing the linen. Fine weave, she admits grudgingly, but a bit thin in places, no? And that stain near the end. She points to a barely visible mark, perhaps a water spot. The widow's heart sinks. She knows it's negligible, but bargaining starts with flaws. She holds her ground, citing the quality of the flax, the tightness of the spin. The haggling is a dance, offer, counter-offer, feigned disinterest, reluctant agreement. Finally, coins change hands, a few silver pennies, perhaps a smaller copper one. The linen is gone. The coins feel cold, alien in her palm, a poor substitute for the fabric's history. Next, the barley. A miller's assistant eyes it, chewing a straw. He plunges a hand in, letting the grains run through his fingers. Dry enough, he grunts. He names a price per bushel, low. She counters, citing the poor harvest up north, a rumor she heard. He shrugs, starts to turn away. Panic flutters. She needs salt. She needs nails. She accepts his price, watching her carefully hoarded grain disappear into his larger sacks. The coins he gives feel lighter than the barley did. Then, the quirky grace note. As she counts her meager coins, a familiar face appears, the baker's wife. She needs good wool for stockings. She examines the widow's spun yarn bundle, feels its evenness. Solid work, she says, not unkindly. She names a fair price. As she measures the yarn using her marked stick, the widow notices her thumb subtly pressing down just beyond the last mark, giving an extra half-inch. The widow's measure. No mention is made. The baker's wife pays the agreed price, takes the yarn, offers a brief nod. It's not charity, it's a fractional adjustment within the system. The widow feels a tiny, unexpected warmth amidst the market's chill. Imagine the return journey. The sack is lighter, but her heart isn't. She carries necessities: a small, precious block of salt wrapped in cloth, a handful of iron nails for repairs, maybe a scrap of bacon or a pot of honey traded for eggs. The coins jingle faintly in the pouch hidden under her cloak. It's not wealth, it's a temporary reprieve. She calculates mentally. The salt will last a month. The nails will mend the shutter. The honey is a luxury she shouldn't have bought, but the memory of sweetness on her tongue during the bleak walk felt necessary. Back in the cottage, the chest gapes open. The space where the linen was folded is starkly empty. The grain level is visibly lower. The process of depletion has begun. It's a necessary evil, but each item sold feels like a tiny dismantling of her fortress. She places the salt carefully inside, near the cookpot. The nails go into the small wooden casket with her sewing things. The coins, she hesitates. Does she add them to the hidden compartment, if she has one? Bury them under the hearthstone? Keep them in the pouch around her neck? Each option carries risk: theft, loss, forgetting. She chooses, the weight of the decision as tangible as the coins. The spindle waits. She picks it up. The familiar motion: draw, twist, wind. This time, the wool isn't just for mending her own cloak. It's for next market day. It's for replacing the sold barley, perhaps buying a new cooking pot when the old one finally cracks. Each rotation is an investment, a slow rebuilding of the chest's depleted reserves. The whirhum is no longer just defiance, it's reconstruction. She spins thread, but she's also spinning time, spinning security back into existence, skein by painstaking skein. The chest remains open, a hungry maw. It demands constant feeding. The victory over her relatives secured the fortress, but the siege of solitude is relentless. It's a siege fought not with swords, but with spindle whirls and shrewd bargains, with a slow conversion of linen into salt, barley into nails, loneliness into fragile, hard-won self-sufficiency. The oak walls stand, but their contents ebb and flow like the tide. Her independence isn't a static state won by the chest. It's a daily practice, measured in pennies earned, grain sold, and thread spun under the watchful, hollow gaze of the open box. The whirhum is the sound of the lifeline taut, holding her above the depths. Section 19. The rhythm of the spindle, whirhum, draw, twist, wind, becomes the metronome of solitary survival. You sell barley, mend cloaks, count pennies. The chest's contents ebb and flow, a tangible measure of your resilience. But solitude, in medieval Brittany, wasn't always a lifelong sentence. The scratchy wool of widowhood could, sometimes, be exchanged for the different weight of a new marriage. And here, nestled amongst the linens and legal parchments, the widow's chest reveals another potent function: remarriage leverage. It's not about hearts and flowers. It's cold calculus. Your carefully preserved independence becomes your most valuable asset in the perilous marketplace of second chances. The mainstream historical reality is stark. Remarriage was often a practical necessity, not a romantic choice, for medieval widows. While Breton law granted them significant autonomy as widows, life alone was brutally hard. A new husband meant shared labor, physical protection, potential help with children, and social reintegration. Crucially, however, Breton customary law generally allowed a widow to retain control of her dower property and the contents of her chest even after remarriage. This was revolutionary compared to regions where a woman's property automatically transferred to her new husband. Her chest wasn't absorbed, it remained hers. This transformed it from a survival kit into a powerful bargaining chip. Now, for the quirky, intensely awkward ritual involved, the chest inspection. Serious suitors didn't just bring flowers, they brought scrutiny. Before formal negotiations, a prospective groom, or more likely, his pragmatic mother or aunt, might request, with faux courtesy masking sharp assessment, a viewing of the widow's chest. Not necessarily the documents, too private, but the goods. The quality of her remaining linens, the thickness of her woolens, the state of her cookpot, the fullness of her grain sack, these were tangible proxies for her prudence, her housekeeping skills, and her residual economic strength. Imagine the widow standing stiffly by as a near stranger lifts the lid, fingers probing her folded sheets, hefting her blanket, sniffing, discreetly, for mothballs or mildew. It was an appraisal of her worth, laid bare in worn oak. Romance, medieval style. But historians still fiercely debate whether this leverage translated to genuine choice or merely better terms within constraint. Did a well-stocked chest allow a widow to reject unsuitable suitors outright, holding out for a kind man or at least one who wouldn't beat her? Or did it simply mean she could negotiate a more favorable marriage contract, securing stronger guarantees for her continued control over her assets, perhaps demanding her new husband contribute more to the household, or even stipulating separate living quarters? Some scholars see the chest as a tool for significant female agency in spouse selection. Others argue societal pressure, loneliness, and economic desperation still forced most widows to remarry, and the chest merely ensured they weren't utterly destitute within the new marriage. Was it a key to freedom, or just a better set of chains? Feel the weight of the suitor's gaze. Jean, the widower miller from the next village, stands in your cottage. He smells of flower dust and damp stone. His eyes, sharp and assessing, dart past you to the chest. His sister, a woman with lips perpetually pursed as if tasting sour milk, accompanies him. A fine chest, Jean remarks, his tone neutral. Sturdy. Good Breton oak. The subtext screams, show me what's inside. You force calm. This isn't Gooey's bluster. This is a different kind of siege. Your hand on the key feels steady, but your stomach churns. Opening the lid now feels like surrendering your last bastion of privacy to the marketplace. The familiar scents rise: linen, herbs, parchment, a faint metallic tang from the cookpot. Jean's sister steps forward, her fingers, surprisingly strong for their thinness, reaching in. Watch her dissect your life. She unfolds a sheet, holding it up to the weak light filtering through the shutters. She rubs the fabric between thumb and forefinger, testing the thread count, the weave's integrity. A small, almost imperceptible nod. Acceptable. She lifts the woolen blanket, gauging its weight, its density against the cold. She peers into the grain sack, plunging a hand deep, letting the kernels run through her fingers, checking for dust, chaff, or the dreaded weevil. She might even tap the iron cookpot, listening for the solid ring of thick metal, not the dull thud of thin, worn iron. Her expression remains impassive, a mask of professional appraisal. Jean watches her, his own face unreadable. The silence is thick, punctuated only by the rustle of fabric and the dry whisper of grain. This is where the documents exert their silent power. You don't need to show them, but their existence hangs in the air. Jean knows the law. He knows this chest, and its contents, remain yours. His sister's meticulous inventory isn't just assessing goods, she's calculating what burdens won't fall on Jean's mill. A widow with her own linens means he doesn't have to provide them. Her own pots mean his kitchen gear remains intact. Her grain means less drain on his stores. Her proven ability to manage these asset signals, she won't be a helpless dependent. The chest isn't just property, it's a resume written in wool and wheat. The inspection ends. Jean's sister gives him a fractional nod. The bargaining begins, but it's unlike the market haggling. It's colder, more formal, mediated perhaps by the village priest or a respected elder. Jean speaks of shared burdens, mutual support, a warm hearth for us both. You speak of clear terms, respect for existing holdings, separate accounting for dower assets. Your voice is calm, but your heart hammers against your ribs. You invoke the chest, not sentiment. You point out the quality of the linens his sister approved, the fullness of the grain sack. You subtly remind him of the legal parchments sleeping within it, guaranteeing your continued control. You are not selling yourself. You are negotiating the merger of two survival enterprises. The quirky chest inspection pays off. Because your linens are well preserved, your grain sack reasonably full, your cookpot thick-bottomed, Jean's sister's report is favorable. This allows you to push for crucial clauses in the new contract, that your chest remains under your lock and key, that income from selling your spun yarn is yours alone, that you retain lifelong rights to your dower cottage regardless of where you live with Jean. He grumbles slightly about the cottage clause. He'd hoped to rent it out, but concedes. The chest's tangible proof of your capability and independence gives you the upper hand. You secure terms a penniless, assetless widow could only dream of. Imagine the signing. Different faces now. Jean, looking slightly put out but resigned. The priest, weary but dutiful. The elder, ensuring the coutumes are followed. You sign, or make your mark, beside Jean's. The new contract is shorter than the first, less laden with youthful hope, more focused on practical boundaries. It acknowledges the oak fortress in the corner. It doesn't promise love, but it guarantees a space of your own within the union. As the wax seals cool, you glance at the chest. Its presence in the room is palpable. It wasn't just a shield against loss, it was the foundation upon which you built a tolerable future. After the sparse wedding feast, paid for partly from your chest's coin reserve, you move your chest into Jean's larger, flower-dusted house. It sits in the corner of the room you'll share, an anomaly. Jean eyes it occasionally, a reminder of the terms he agreed to. You keep the key. When you spin now, the whirhum has a different timbre. It's not just survival, it's autonomy maintained. The grain you sell is your coin. The yarn you spin is your security. The chest is no longer just a lifeline. It's a declaration embedded in oak. I am not absorbed. I endure. The remarriage might offer warmth, shared labor, a respite from utter solitude. But the chest ensures you enter this new chapter not as chattel, but as a partner with her own fortress, her terms etched not just in parchment, but in the very grain of the wood. The spindle spins on, weaving the thread of your continued independence into the fabric of a shared, pragmatic life. Section 20. The weight of the chest in Jean's house isn't just physical, it's a social landmark. Its presence in the corner, its bulk, the dull sheen of its iron bands, these speak volumes before you utter a word. In the close-knit, watchful world of a medieval Breton village, your widow's chest isn't merely storage. It's a social status marker, a silent herald announcing your place on the precarious ladder of respectability. Its size, its construction, the quality and quantity of its semi-publicly known contents broadcast a message as clearly as a town crier. This woman is not to be ignored. This woman has substance. Mainstream history confirms that material possessions were potent social signifiers in medieval communities. While nobility flaunted castles and tapestries, for the peasant and artisan classes, household goods were the visible measure of worth. A large, iron-bound oak chest signified more than just security. It signaled a family with resources sufficient to commission skilled carpentry and expensive ironwork. A chest known to be well stocked with fine linens, thick woolens, a solid cookpot, and ample grain spoke of prudence, female industry, spinning, weaving, management, and a household that wasn't perpetually teetering on the edge of ruin. For the widow, possessing such a chest elevated her above the destitute bagwomen reliant on parish charity, granting her a crucial measure of respect and influence within the village hierarchy. It was her social ballast. Now, for a quirky, status-conscious deception sometimes employed, borrowed prestige. Before the crucial chest-loading ceremony, a bride's family facing lean times might discreetly borrow impressive items from slightly wealthier relatives or neighbors. A particularly fine blanket, a larger copper pot, or even an extra sack of higher quality grain might find its way temporarily into the chest, solely for the witness transfer. After the ceremony, once the in-laws were satisfied and the document signed, these items would be quietly returned under cover of darkness. Imagine the anxious whispers, the clandestine transfer of the show pot back to its owner, the sigh of relief mingled with shame. It was a risky gambit to inflate perceived status, a performance for the village audience. Getting caught meant devastating humiliation. But historians still fiercely debate whether this visible status translated to genuine social power or merely fragile respectability. Did a widow with a known good chest have a stronger voice in village disputes? Could she influence decisions about gleaning rights, feast day allocations, or the hiring of communal labor? Some scholars argue yes, pointing to widows recorded as providing sureties or mediating minor conflicts, roles requiring community trust often linked to perceived stability, embodied by the chest. Others contend that respectability was passive. She might avoid overt scorn but lacked real authority in a rigidly patriarchal structure. Was the chest a platform, or merely a shield against the worst contempt? The village green holds its secrets. See the chest through the village's eyes. When you first arrived as a bride, the size and sturdiness of Jan's craftsmanship was noted. Gossip flowed. Did you see the strapping on Perine's chest? Thick as a ship's band. Her father must have paid extra for that. The witnessed loading became public theatre. Whispers followed the unfolding layers. 6 pairs of sheets. Good quality. Solid pot. And look at that grain. Dry, plump. They've done well by her. Or conversely, a poorly made chest, thin linens, a visibly dented pot, a half-empty grain sack. Poor Ganail scraping the barrel, they were. That won't see her through a hard winter. She'll be on the parish rolls soon enough. Your worth was tabulated in linen threads and barley kernels. Feel the weight of expectation. As a widow, the chest's ongoing state becomes a public barometer of your competence. Selling items at market is necessary, but what you sell and how much is scrutinized. If you're seen selling your best blanket within a year, tongues wag, desperate already? Poor management. Knew she couldn't handle it. Conversely, if you're spotted buying new wool for spinning, or having the blacksmith mend your pot rather than replace it cheaply, it signals resilience. See? Prudent. Using her chest wisely. Building it back up. A capable woman. The village watches your economic respiration. Inhale, income, replenishment, exhale, sales, depletion, and judges your fitness to remain independent. Witness the subtle social currents. At the communal bread oven, the other women make space for you. Not necessarily warmly, but with a baseline respect. Your opinion on the best rye for grinding, the right herbs for moth prevention, or the reliability of a traveling peddler might be solicited. Why? Because your chest signifies you manage resources. You are not a charity case. You are a fellow householder, however solitary. The butcher might offer you a slightly better cut. The miller grind your grain a fraction finer, not just from kindness, but from the understanding that you are a customer with assets, however modest, not a supplicant. The chest also dictates your vulnerability to gossip, that deadly medieval social weapon. A widow known for a poorly maintained chest is easy prey. Rumors of laziness, mismanagement, or hidden vice, drinking away coin. Secret lovers draining resources, cling easily. No wonder her chest is thin. Saw her coming back from Jahon's tavern last week. Conversely, a widow who keeps her chest respectably stocked, her mourning attire neat, and her cottage in order builds a fortress of reputation. Gossip might still flow, but it struggles to gain traction against the tangible evidence of her competence. Say what you will, but her linens are always mended, her grain bins never empty. She runs a tight house. The chest is her character witness. Imagine the pressure during hard times. A poor harvest. Your grain sack dwindles faster. You sell the smaller cooking pot, keeping the large cauldron. You trade 2 older blankets for salt and lamp oil. The village notes these sales. Sympathy mixes with assessment. Does this look like prudent triage, or the beginning of a slide? Your neighbors might offer discreet help, an extra loaf, an offer to share a haul of firewood, not just from charity, but from a vested interest in preventing your respectable status from collapsing entirely, which would reflect poorly on the whole community. Maintaining your chest's perceived level becomes a communal, albeit unspoken, project. The borrowed prestige gambit, if discovered, is social suicide. Imagine the whispers turning to open scorn. That fine blanket? Borrowed from Marie. The extra grain. Returned the next day. Cheats. Pretenders. The carefully constructed edifice of respectability crumbles overnight. The chest, instead of a mark of substance, becomes a monument to deception. You are relegated below the beggars, branded untrustworthy. The risk underscores how vital the genuine status signaled by the chest truly was. It was worth lies for some, because the truth of poverty meant social death. For the widow who remarried Jean the Miller, the chest's presence in his house is a final, powerful statement. It tells his household, his customers, the village, I came with assets. I retain control. I am not absorbed, I add. Its size compared to Jean's own storage chests is noted. Its continued good order under your key is a testament to your enduring competence, even within marriage. It elevates you from Jean's new wife to the widow Perrine with the good chest. It ensures you enter the complex social dance of the village not as a dependent appendage, but as a woman who brings her own weight, her own history, her own tangible proof of worth, anchored firmly in iron and oak. The whir hum of your spindle in Jean's house isn't just making thread. It's weaving the continuous thread of your established, chest-backed identity into the fabric of a new, but not subsumed, life. The village watches, measures, and adjusts its perception accordingly. The chest remains your anchor in the turbulent sea of social standing. Section 21. The rhythmic whir-hum of your spindle spins a fragile piece, the chest a familiar fortress in Jean's house. But a different kind of shadow looms, one no amount of wool can ward off, the shadow of the taxman. Forget greedy relatives. This is the relentless, impersonal machinery of authority. The Lord's bailiff, parchment ledger in hand, ink-stained fingers tapping, arrives not to negotiate, but to assess. Your carefully curated independence chest, that bastion of security, is about to be inventoried, valued, and taxed. Its very existence, a mark of status and survival, now paints a target on your back. Mainstream history confirms that medieval widows, even under Breton custom, were rarely exempt from the myriad taxes and dues owed to their lord, the church, and the crown. These could include annual rents on land, even her dower cottage, taille, a direct tax often levied arbitrarily, hearth taxes, church tithes, a tenth of produce or income, and special levies for war or the lord's ransom. The movable goods within the widow's chest were prime targets for valuation. The bailiff's visit wasn't a request, it was an incursion. His assessment directly impacted how much coin she must scrape together or which precious items she might be forced to sell. Now, for a quirky, desperate evasion tactic whispered in cottages, the sudden moth plague. On the eve of a known bailiff's visit, a widow might frantically discover a catastrophic, entirely fictional moth infestation. She'd sprinkle pepper dust or wood ash over her best woolens and linens, rub herbs vigorously into the fibers to create a pungent smell, and even strategically damage a corner of a lesser blanket with scissors to mimic larvae holes. When the bailiff arrived, she'd fling open the chest lid with theatrical despair. Look! Ruined! The cursed moths! All my best work, dust! Worthless now, good sir, utterly worthless. The goal: to drastically lower the assessed value of her textiles, hoping the bailiff, repelled by the mess and smell, would take her word and a discreetly offered small coin and move quickly to the next item. It was a performance worthy of a mystery play, starring pepper and desperation. But historians still fiercely debate the bailiff's discretion versus systematic exploitation. Were these officials pragmatic assessors, willing to accept plausible devaluations to ease collection from impoverished widows? Or were they incentivized predators, deliberately overvaluing goods to extract maximum revenue, and perhaps a personal kickback, knowing widows had limited recourse? Some records show bailiffs reducing assessments based on obvious damage or hardship pleas. Others reveal widows petitioning higher authorities, claiming extortionate overvaluation forced them to sell essential items. Was the bailiff a functionary doing a difficult job, or an agent of systematic extraction preying on the vulnerable? The ink in the ledgers is often silent on motive. Feel the dread preceding his arrival. Word spreads through the village, Le Goff rides tomorrow. Assessments. A cold knot forms in your stomach. Jean, perhaps, grumbles about his own mill's dues, offering little comfort. You open the chest, not to use, but to survey. Your gaze sweeps the layers, the folded linens, the heavy woolens, the cookpot, the grain sack, the spindle. Each item is no longer just security. It's a potential tax liability. How much will he value that slightly dented pot? How many pennies per ell for the linen he's never felt? The familiar scents of herbs and wood smoke now smell like impending loss. Hear the horses' hooves clatter on the packed earth outside. The bailiff, Le Goff, dismounts with a grunt. He's not a villain, just weary and efficient, smelling of leather, horse, and stale wine. His assistant carries the ledger, a tome of doom. They enter without ceremony. Le Goff's eyes sweep the room, lingering on the chest. Bonjour, Widow Perrine. Jean. Time for the valuation. No small talk. Business. Witness the method. The chest lid is opened. Legoff doesn't rummage, he directs. The linens. Show me. You unfold a sheet. His fingers, thick and calloused, rub the fabric. He holds it to the light, squinting. Homespun. Good weight, but coarse. 5 Ls. Value, 2 pennies the L. His assistant scribbles. You bite your tongue. You spun that flax yourself. It's finer than he claims. But argue. Risk his temper. A higher valuation elsewhere. You remain silent. The Woolens. He hefts the winter cloak. Fulled. Decent. Shows wear at the cuffs. Value, 8 pennies. It's half what it costs to make. He taps the cookpot. Iron. Thick base. Dented here. Value, 12 pennies. He peers into the grain sack, scoops a handful. Barley. Dry. 2 bushels. Value, 3 pennies the bushel. Each pronouncement is a tiny amputation. He barely glances at the spindle and distaff. Tools. Minimal value. Your livelihood. Dismissed. This is where the sudden moth plague might have been deployed. Had you sprinkled ash, peppered the folds, snipped a hole, you'd point with a trembling hand. See, bailiff? The moths. They got into the best blanket. And the shift. Ruined. Worthless rags now. You'd hope he'd recoil from the peppery smell, see the damage, and scrawl infested woolens, value negligible. A saved tax penny is a penny earned. But today, you hadn't prepared. You endure the undervaluation, a different kind of loss. Then, the documents. He doesn't read them, but he notes their existence. Marriage contract. Land deed for the dower cottage. These anchor your land tax, separate from the movable goods. Their presence ensures you're taxed on the cottage itself. The chest protects your goods from kin, but not your property from the lord. The assistant notes the cottage's annual rent due. The chest's contents must now generate enough to pay for the roof over them. Consider the assessment's aftermath. Legoff and his assistant leave, ledger updated. You're left with a mental calculation. The total valuation for your movable goods, perhaps 20 pennies. The tax due, a quarter of that value, a third, plus the cottage rent, plus the church tithe on any income from spinning. The numbers swim. The grain he valued at 3 pennies per bushel must now be sold to pay the tax levied on it, forcing you to sell more than you can spare. Or perhaps you must sell the cookpot he valued at 12 pennies to pay the tax on the pot and the linens. The absurd, crushing logic of it settles like stone. Imagine the strategies. Do you preemptively sell smaller items before the next assessment, hoping to fly under the radar with fewer visible assets? Risky, appearing destitute might invite other problems. Do you invest in items harder to value, intricate embroidery on a coif, a beautifully carved distaff? Hoping Legoff, untrained in craft, might undervalue the artistry? Or do you simply hide small valuables, a silver brooch, a few coins, in the fabled hidden compartment, praying it escapes notice? Every decision is a gamble against an opaque system. The bailiff's visit leaves a residue of powerlessness. The chest, your fortress against personal predation, is breached by impersonal authority. Its contents are dissected, reduced to numbers in a ledger, converted into obligations that threaten to drain it. You close the lid, the familiar thud sounding hollow this time. The whir hum of the spindle starts again, but the rhythm feels heavier. You're not just spinning thread for market now. You're spinning pennies for Legoff, for the lord, for the distant king. The chest remains your anchor, but the taxman's ledger is the chain that binds it to the depths. Each rotation of the spindle is a turn of the screw, tightening the grip of survival into a stranglehold of obligation. Independence, you realize with grim clarity, has its price meticulously recorded in someone else's book. The oak walls stand, but the world has found a way to tax the air inside. Section 22. The bailiff's ledger snaps shut, leaving behind the hollow ache of assessed value. But the threat of loss takes a more intimate, venomous form when the knock isn't official parchment, but familial knuckles rapping wood. The door creaks open, not on Legoff's weary face, but on the simmering resentment of your husband's nephew, Alon. His eyes, hot and greedy, lock onto the chest. The previous encounter was a skirmish. This is war. The legal shield forged in oak and ink faces its ultimate test, inheritance battles. The chest isn't just security now. It's contested territory, the prize in a feud that pits blood against contract, memory against law. Mainstream history reveals inheritance disputes as a grim constant, especially concerning widows' dower rights. Bretoncustoms provided strong protections, but aggrieved relatives, sons impatient for full control, nephews feeling disinherited, brothers claiming family assets, frequently mounted legal challenges. These weren't polite courtroom dramas. They were costly, protracted, emotionally devastating affairs fought in local courts overseen by the Lord's provost or bailiff, blending customary law, written evidence, witness testimony, and raw village politics. The widow's chest, specifically its documents and the tangible proof of its contents matching the contract, became the central exhibit. Losing meant not just property, but destitution and social ruin. Now, for a quirky, high-stakes courtroom ritual, the saint's bone testimony. To bolster the sanctity of witness accounts, or perhaps expose perjury, parties might be required to swear oaths while physically touching a relic, a fragment of saint's bone, a vial of holy dust, or the church's most sacred gospel book. Folk belief held the saint would punish false swearers with immediate bodily harm, a withered hand, sudden blindness, a fit. Imagine the widow, hand trembling over the relic, repeating the terms of her contract, while Alon sweats, fingers hovering, forced to deny claims he knows are true, gambling divine retribution against earthly gain. It was spiritual Russian roulette played with ossuaries. But historians still fiercely debate the court's true impartiality. Did local lords and bailiffs genuinely uphold Breton customary law based on evidence? Or did they favor powerful families, male claimants, or simply the highest bribe? Some scholars point to judgments respecting widows' contracts, suggesting the system could work. Others cite cases where widows clearly lost rightful claims due to influential opponents, corrupt officials, or the sheer expense of prolonged litigation forcing them to settle for crumbs. Was the court a temple of law, or just another arena where wealth and connections dictated the outcome? The verdicts, often terse, rarely reveal the why. Feel the summons. A scrap of parchment delivered by a sullen boy, Widow Perrine, appeared before the Provost Court at the Manor Hall on St. Jude's Day, to answer the claim of Alon Lemoine concerning dower goods unlawfully withheld. The words blur. Your breath catches. Alon isn't just contesting a pot, he's challenging the contract itself, claiming the chest's contents exceed her rightful share or include family heirlooms. The cottage walls feel thinner. The chest looms larger, a beacon attracting storms. Hear the courtroom. Not a grand hall, but a drafty, timber-framed room in the manor, smelling of damp stone, unwashed wool, and anxiety. Villagers pack the back, buzzing with gossip. The provost sits at a trestle table, flanked by the bailiff, Legoff, ledger open, and a few village elders, living repositories of the coutumes. Alon stands, jaw set, radiating aggrieved entitlement. You stand opposite, the chest a silent presence beside you, its bulk a physical counterpoint to Alon's bluster. The air crackles with hostility. Witness the assault. Alon speaks first, voice loud, projecting for the crowd. My uncle, Mark, God rest him, was generous to a fault. This contract, he waves dismissively at your precious parchment held by the bailiff, was signed when he was ill, pressured. She's hoarded goods meant for his blood. That oak chest, his father's wood, the linens, woven by my grandmother, the grain, from family fields. He paints a picture of theft cloaked in legality, playing to the crowd's sense of familial loyalty. His supporters murmur agreement. Your turn. You force your voice steady, addressing the provost, not the crowd. The contract, provost. Signed by Mark, witnessed by Father Male, Alon's own grandfather Gui, and Jan the carpenter. Sealed by the bailiff's predecessor. It lists every item. 6 pairs sheets, spun and hemmed by my mother. The cookpot, bought by my dowry coin at the Moor Lakes Fair. The grain, my portion from the last harvest before Mark's death. The chest timber, paid for by my father, receipt held by Jan. You cite dates, witnesses still alive. You invoke the coutumes by name. You point to the chest. The goods within match the list. Inspect them. This is where the saint's bone testimony might erupt. If witness accounts conflict dramatically, a neighbor swears the pot was Alan's grandmother's, another insists it was market-bought, the provost might order the relic brought forth. A chill falls. The priest places a small, ornate casket on the table, opening it to reveal a yellowed fragment of bone on velvet. The widow and the accuser, the conflicting witnesses, must lay hands upon it and swear. You touch the cold bone, your oath firm. By St. Corentin's relic, I swear the cookpot was bought new for my marriage chest with my father's coin. Alan, or his witness, hesitates. Sweat beads on their forehead. To swear falsely now risks divine wrath before the entire village. The pressure is immense. A mumbled, unconvincing oath might damn their case more than silence. Watch the evidentiary dance. The bailiff unrolls your marriage contract, reading the relevant clauses aloud. The provost compares it to the chest's contents as items are displayed, the sheets unfolded, the pot held up, grain measured. Do they match? The elders confer, murmuring about precedent. Old Unri's widow, same thing, 30 years back, chest held firm. Alan's lawyer, if he has one, tries to pick apart the contract's wording or impugn witnesses. Father Male was half-blind when he signed. Jan's receipt? Lost? Convenient. It's a brutal tug-of-war over truth, fought with parchment, memory, and the tangible proof of wool and wood. Consider the cost. Not just the potential loss, but the process. Each court appearance means lost spinning time, lost income. Paying a scribe for document copies. Perhaps bribing a witness for favorable testimony, a dark, common reality. Feeding supporters who attend court with you. The chest's resources, meant for survival, are drained to defend its very existence. Victory might be Pyrrhic, leaving the fortress intact but its stores critically depleted. Imagine the verdict. The provost clears his throat. The room holds its breath. By the customs of this place, and the evidence presented, a pause, agonizing. The claim of Alan Lemoine is dismissed. The dower goods listed in the contract of Perrine and Mark, held within the chest presented, are confirmed hers in full possession. Court costs to be borne by the claimant. Relief, cold and dizzying, washes over you. Alan's face purples with rage and shame. The crowd murmurs, some satisfied, some disappointed. The chest has held. Law, witnessed by saints and villagers, has prevailed. But the scars remain. The public airing of grievance poisons the village well. Alan and his kin become bitter enemies. The cost of victory is etched in the grain sack's lower level. The silver pennies spent on scribes now gone. You return to Jean's house. The chest is wheeled back into its corner. You unlock it, not to use its contents, but to verify them, touch them, reassure yourself they are still yours. The victory is real, but it tastes of ash and exhaustion. The provost's final words hang, "Let this be an end to it." But you know better. Inheritance battles rarely ended neatly. Appeals to higher lords were possible. Grudges festered. The chest remained a trophy of your victory and a target for renewed resentment. You close the heavy lid. The thud is final, for now. The legal shield, though battered, remains intact. The whir hum of the spindle starts, softer now, spinning thread and spinning time, hoping the fragile piece bought with parchment and stress will hold. The oak fortress stands, but the siege mentality lingers, a shadow cast by the long, bitter fight fought over its contents. Independence, defended in court, carries the heavy scent of ink, sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Section 23. The victory over Alan echoes, a hard-won silence settling over Jean's house. The chest stands firm, its legal shield proven in the crucible of court. But the world outside is shifting. The damp Breton air carries whispers not just of village gossip, but of distant edicts, royal seals, and the relentless grind of a centralizing power. The very coutumes that birthed the widow's independence chest, nurtured by Brittany's ancient autonomy, are facing a slow, suffocating erosion. The oak fortress remains, but the legal ground beneath it is turning to sand. Changing laws, fading practice, the era of the widow's chest is dimming, not with a bang, but with the dry rustle of parchment from Paris. Mainstream history pinpoints the gradual integration of Brittany into the Kingdom of France, culminating in the formal union in 1532, as the death knell for many distinctive local customs. French royal law, heavily influenced by Roman principles and seeking uniformity, increasingly viewed regional variations like Breton inheritance practices as inconvenient obstacles. Key instruments of this change were royal ordinances and the growing authority of Parlement de Paris over provincial disputes. For widows, the crucial shift was the imposition of French marital property regimes, particularly the move towards communauté des biens, community of property, where all assets acquired during marriage became jointly owned, fundamentally undermining the Breton concept of the wife's separate dower property physically symbolized by the chest. Now, for a quirky, defiant act of resistance, the chest-burning protest. As royal officials began demanding adherence to new French inheritance laws in the mid-16th century, sporadic reports surfaced, particularly from remote Breton parishes, of widows, backed by furious village elders, dragging their cherished oak chests into the church square and setting them ablaze. It wasn't destruction born of despair, but of fierce, symbolic protest. The message was visceral. If our law, our custom, embodied in this chest, is deemed void by Paris, then let the symbol burn. Better ashes than surrender to your foreign rules. Imagine the crackling oak, the smell of burning linens and wool, the grim faces lit by the flames, a funeral pyre for local autonomy. It was legal seppuku performed on domestic furniture. But historians still fiercely debate the pace and penetration of this legal erosion. Did the 1539 Ordinance of Villers-Cotterets, mandating French for legal documents, instantly invalidate Breton marriage contracts? Did royal bailiffs immediately start overturning dower chest claims? Some scholars argue the change was glacial, especially in rural areas. Local courts clung to the old ways for generations, paying lip service to Paris while quietly upholding the coutumes. Others point to court records from regional seneschaussées, royal bailiwicks, showing widows losing cases in the 1540s because their Breton contracts lacked conformity to French models. Was it a swift decapitation, or a slow strangulation of tradition? The flames of the chest burnings suggest moments of violent rupture amidst a generally creeping displacement. Feel the insidious change. Imagine the widow, perhaps Perrine's daughter, decades later. Her marriage contract looks different. Drafted in stilted French, not the familiar Breton cadences or Latin, invoking French legal terms like communauté alongside fading mentions of douar, dower. The carpenter still builds a chest, but its purpose feels blurred. Is it her fortress, or just household storage? The comforting certainty embedded in the old oak is fracturing. Hear the confusion in the courtroom. A widow tries to assert her dower rights based on her mother's chest-back contract. The newly appointed royal magistrate, trained in Paris, frowns at the document. This independence chest provision, not recognized under the ordinance. Movable goods acquired during marriage fall under the community. You are entitled to a life interest in 1/3, perhaps, but the contents, they belong to the estate, to be divided according to French inheritance law. The local elders protest, citing the coutumes. The magistrate waves a dismissive hand, superseded by the king's justice. The oak chest, present as evidence, suddenly looks like a relic, its iron bands meaningless against the weight of royal decree. Witness the pragmatic adaptation, another form of fading. Some families, foreseeing the change, begin to downplay the chest's significance. They still fill it with linens and pots, but the ritual loading becomes less formal, less publicly witnessed. The contract specifies French-style community property, perhaps with a small, separate cache sum vaguely designated as the widow's support, a pale ghost of the dower chest's tangible security. The chest becomes sentimental storage, not a legal vault. Its power is leaching away, not through direct assault, but through bureaucratic disregard. Consider the generational shift. Young brides, influenced by tales of Parisian fashion and royal authority, start to see the massive, old-fashioned Breton chests as cumbersome relics of a backward past. They desire lighter, more decorative furniture, French styles. The skills of carpenters like Jan, who knew the secrets of hidden compartments and iron-bound strength for chests meant to last centuries, begin to wane. The demand shifts. The chests built now are thinner, lighter, meant for show, not siege. The purpose is forgotten before the form vanishes entirely. The chest-burning protest erupts in a village near Quimper. News travels fast. A widow, Mathilde, faced with a royal bailiff demanding an inventory of her chest's contents for estate division under French law after her husband's death, snaps. Backed by her sons, who stand to lose under the new system too, and the village patriarch, she drags her great-grandmother's chest into the square. Folk gather, muttering. Pitch is procured. As the bailiff sputters protests, she sets it alight. "You want my goods. Take them. Take them as smoke and ash." This chest held Breton law. Breton law is dead by Parisian decree. Then let its shell burn. The flames leap high, consuming linens, wool, the precious marriage contract within. It's a terrifying, magnificent act of defiance. The bailiff retreats, fearing the mob's mood. But the victory is Pyrrhic. Mathilde is left with nothing but ashes and a reputation for dangerous fervor. The law doesn't change, it just marks her village as troublesome. For the vast majority, the fade is quieter. The widow needing to sell a blanket no longer thinks of it as drawing on her secured reserve, but as selling a share of the community assets. The careful distinction between hers and theirs, maintained for centuries by the chest, blurs and vanishes. The key around her neck feels lighter, less significant. When she dies, her chest is simply inventoried alongside the bedstead and the cooking pots, its contents dispersed according to French inheritance rules, not Breton dower rights. The oak box might pass to a daughter, repurposed for storing turnips or children's clothes, its original meaning lost, its history folded away like the old linens it once protected. The changing laws don't just alter property rights, they reshape identity. The widow's chest was more than a box. It was a physical manifestation of Breton distinctiveness, of a legal space carved out for female autonomy within a patriarchal world. Its decline mirrors Brittany's subsumption into France. The whir hum of the spindle continues, but the thread it spins now weaves into a different tapestry, one defined by Parisian codes, not Breton customs. The fortress of oak still stands in the corner, but its gates have been unlocked by royal decree, its treasures reclassified, its original, defiant purpose fading into the damp Breton mist, becoming just another piece of furniture in a slowly homogenizing world. The law moves on, leaving the heavy, silent chest as a monument to a receding past, its story whispered only in the memories of old women and the scent of herbs lingering in empty drawers. Section 24. The crackle of protest fires fades, the scent of burning oak replaced by the quiet, cool air of preservation. You leave the smoky squares and contested courtrooms behind, stepping centuries forward into the hushed, sterile light of a museum. Here, under glass or roped off on polished floors, sit the last chests standing. Massive, iron-bound Breton oak chests, survivors of damp, disputes, and the slow death of custom. They command space, these venerable veterans, but their presence feels spectral, hollowed out. They are magnificent shells, stripped of the vital, scratchy, smelly, living purpose that once animated them. Their display is a victory of conservation, yet a profound testament to loss. The mainstream historical fact grounding this scene is the rarity of intact medieval chests, especially ones definitively identifiable as widows' independence chests. Wood perishes, iron rusts, linens rot, mice, fire, and generations of reuse take their toll. The examples preserved in museums like the Musée Breton in Quimper or the Château des Ducs de Bretagne in Nantes are exceptional. They survived abandonment in attics, repurposing as tool chests or grain bins, or sheer dumb luck. Their identification often relies on distinctive Breton craftsmanship, specific jointing techniques, regional ironwork patterns, unusual size or sturdiness, coupled with provenance tracing them to old Breton families, though the specific widow's purpose is usually inferred, not proven. Now, for a quirky, modern conservation headache, the ghost smell dilemma. Museum conservators, armed with chromatographs and humidity sensors, wage a constant battle against the very essence these chests once held. Centuries of ingrained odors, lanolin from wool, pungent herbs, rosemary, lavender, tansy, the faint metallic tang of tallow, the earthy smell of grain dust, even the ghost of that infamous fish oil or hedgehog dung, slowly leach out of the wood. While fascinating to historians, these volatile organic compounds, VOCs, can damage the chest itself, attract pests, or overwhelm other exhibits. Imagine delicate negotiations. Do they aggressively clean the wood, erasing its olfactory history, or carefully manage the environment, allowing the chest to gently exhale its past into filtered air? Preserving the physical shell sometimes means sanitizing its soul. But historians and curators still fiercely debate what these empty chests can truly tell us. Can we definitively distinguish a widow's independence chest from a similarly sturdy coffer used for general manorial storage or a merchant's goods? Some argue the exceptional thickness of the bottom boards for damp floors, the frequent presence of complex locking mechanisms for security, and unusual size to hold bulky bedding and grain point to the specific dower function, especially when found in domestic contexts. Others counter that sturdiness and good locks were desirable for any valuable storage. Without the original contents list tucked inside, or an inscription stating its purpose, the chest remains mute on its most defining characteristic. Is it a unique cultural artifact, or just a particularly well-made box? The silent oak offers no definitive verdict. See it now. Ropes keep you at bay. The chest sits on a low platform, spotlighted. The Breton oak, centuries old, is darkened, polished by time and countless hands. But the grain is still visible, deep, swirling patterns like frozen rivers. The iron straps are thick, blackened with age, rivets like clenched fists holding the wood together. There might be a massive lock, now frozen open, or the keyhole gapes empty. It looks indestructible, a fortress built for eternity. But inside, emptiness. Perhaps a discreet velvet lining added by the museum, a mocking parody of the layers it once held. The void within is palpable. You long to run your hand along the interior, feeling the grooves worn by stacked linens, the scuffs from pots being shifted, but glass or distance forbids. Notice the absences. No faint scent of rosemary or moth-repelling tansy. No greasy smear where tallow candles rested. No lingering metallic whisper from the cookpot. No scratchy imprint of woolen folds on the wood. The sensory tapestry, the smell of security, the texture of preparedness, is gone, replaced by the neutral, climate-controlled sterility of preservation. The chest is preserved, but its context is pickled, detached. Consider the missing layers. Where are the 6 pairs of sheets, each fold a memory of labor? The heavy woolen cloak, armor against the Breton chill? The dented cookpot, witness to countless solitary meals? The grain sack, ballast of survival? The spindle and distaff, tools of economic defiance? The pilgrim badge, shield against the unseen? The brittle parchment, sword of law? They are scattered to dust, repurposed, sold, or lost. The museum label might list, * oak chest, ironbound, Brittany, late 15th century. Used for storage. * the words feel achingly inadequate. It's like labeling a cathedral stone building. The debate over hidden compartments becomes academic here. Conservators might have X-rayed the chest, revealing a cleverly constructed void in the base or lid. But it's empty. Was it ever used? What secret did it hold? A widow's meager coin hoard? A forbidden love letter? A second copy of her marriage contract? Or was it simply a carpenter's flourish, unused? The empty space tantalizes and frustrates. The tactile password, the sequence of taps known only to her, died with her. The secret is doubly lost. Imagine the journey to this pedestal. Rescued from a barn where it held rusty tools. Saved from a fire that consumed the cottage around it. Donated by a descendant who knew only that it was Grandmere's old box. Each scrape, dent, and stain tells a story, but the language is cryptic. That deep gouge near the lock, was it from Alan's furious attempt to pry it open? That dark, circular stain on the bottom, spilled grain ale during the loading ritual? Or just water damage? We project narratives onto the scars, but the chest keeps its own counsel. The ghost smell dilemma underscores the paradox. To save the physical object, we must often erase the environmental evidence clinging to it, the very proof of its lived reality. The conservator's careful solvents wash away the last molecules of lanolin, lavender, and anxiety sweat. The chest becomes pristine, stable, and sanitized. Its survival is a triumph of material conservation, but a loss of embodied history. We saved the ship, but the ocean it sailed, the cargo it carried, the hands that steered it, are gone. These last chests standing are powerful, yet profoundly melancholy. They are tombstones for a system, for a way of conceptualizing female security and autonomy that has vanished. They speak of incredible craftsmanship, of foresight built into wood and iron, of a society that, however imperfectly, carved out a space for widowhood that wasn't utter destitution. But standing silent in the museum glow, stripped of their vital, messy contents and the legal social framework that gave the meaning, they are also elegies. They remind us that objects only fully live within their context. The fortress walls endure, but the life they protected, the battles they witnessed, the independence they embodied, have faded like the ghost smells conservators meticulously erase. The whir-hum of the spindle is silenced. Only the heavy, empty oak remains, a monument to a world where security had grain, scent, texture, weight, and a lock only one woman could open. Its preservation is our gain, but its emptiness is our enduring loss. The final, silent testimony of the chest is the profound quiet of what's missing. Section 25. The museum's sterile silence fades, replaced by the softer quiet of your own thoughts, the gentle hum of the fan you turned on hours ago. The image of that empty, spotlighted chest lingers, but it's no longer just oak and iron under glass. It dissolves, merging with the damp mist of memory, the scratch of wool, the guttering rushlight sizzle. The widow's independence chest, that ingenious, heavy-hearted engine of female survival, is gone. Not just the physical object, but the intricate web of law, labor, and community understanding that gave it life. Its demise leaves behind not just empty corners in cottages, but an echo in the emptiness, a resonant silence where a unique form of security once thrummed. The mainstream historical fact framing this ending is the near-total triumph of French royal law over Bretoncustoms by the late 17th century. The formal union of 1532 was just the beginning. Subsequent centuries saw relentless legal and administrative pressure. The Ordinance of Blois, 1579, further standardized inheritance, and the relentless centralization under Louis XIV hammered the final nails into the coffin of local autonomy. The specific legal concept of the widow's inviolable dower chest, rooted in pre-feudal Celtic traditions and nurtured by Breton distinctiveness, simply couldn't survive in a system demanding uniformity and prioritizing patrilineal inheritance. Its protections were absorbed, diluted, or outright abolished, replaced by French marital property regimes that offered widows far less tangible security. Now, for a quirky, poignant modern echo, the memory chest revival. In recent decades, some Breton cultural revival groups and feminist historians have attempted symbolic recreations. Women gather to build replica chests using traditional techniques, fill them with hand-spun linens, woven woolens, and replica documents, and stage public loadings or exhibitions. It's part historical reenactment, part activist gesture, reclaiming a narrative of female resourcefulness. Imagine the scent of fresh oak shavings mingling with lavender sachets, the rhythmic tap of the cooper's mallet, women debating how many widow stitches to include, a heartfelt, slightly melancholic homage to a system irrevocably lost. Its history reimagined as hopeful craft, filling the void with intention, if not original function. But scholars still fiercely debate the true nature of the loss. Was the chest primarily a practical tool for navigating a harsh world, or did its disappearance represent a deeper erosion of female agency encoded in custom? Some argue its loss was mainly economic. Widows became more vulnerable to poverty without that tangible buffer. Others contend its symbolic power was paramount. It was a physical manifestation of society's recognition that a woman, stripped of her husband, still possessed an inviolable core of self and property, separate from patriarchal claims. Did destroying the chest, literally or legally, destroy a crucial conceptual space for female autonomy? The echoes are ambiguous, resonating differently across the fields of law, economics, and gender studies. Feel the absence now, not in the museum, but in the fabric of the past. Picture the cottage corner where the chest once stood. The packed earth floor holds only the ghostly impression of its weight, a slight depression slowly filling with dust. The air lacks the complex perfume of stored linens, herbs, and parchment. The silence is deeper, missing the subtle creak of the lid settling, the rustle of grain, the soft thud of a woolen cloak being folded away. That space wasn't just physical. It was psychological territory. It was a woman's acknowledged, law-backed claim to a future not defined by charity or remarriage. Its removal shrank her world. Consider the shift in vulnerability. Without the chest's legally mandated contents, the widow faced widowhood stripped bare. Her survival hinged more precariously on the kindness of sons, who might prioritize their own households, the fluctuating charity of the parish, or the terms of a new marriage contract drafted under less protective French law. The slow accumulation of security, sheet by sheet, sack by sack, became harder, often impossible. The fortress was dismantled, leaving her exposed on open ground. The whir hum of the spindle continued, but the thread it spun now felt thinner, more easily snapped by misfortune. The quirky memory chest revival highlights the enduring fascination. Why do these replicas resonate? It's not nostalgia for cold, flea-ridden beds or smoky tallow lights. It's a yearning for the clarity the chest represented, for the tangible proof of foresight rewarded, for the legal weight given to women's domestic labor, the spinning, weaving, preserving, saving, labor so often rendered invisible. The replica chests are vessels for a modern desire to see that work validated, to touch its physical legacy, however reimagined. They fill the historical emptiness with aspiration. Yet, the emptiness persists. The replicas are beautiful ghosts. They hold no legal power. No bailiff recognizes their contents. No court upholds their symbolic claim. They sit in cultural centers or at feminist gatherings, admired, discussed, then locked away. They cannot recreate the intricate social and legal ecosystem that gave the original chest its profound meaning. They are echoes trying to rebuild the mountain that made them. The true echo, perhaps, lies in the concept itself, the radical notion that a woman deserved, by right and foresight, a tangible portion of security held in her own name, beyond the reach of husband, kin, or even the state's shifting whims. This concept didn't die with the Breton chest. It flickered elsewhere, evolved, and persists in fragmented forms: prenuptial agreements, separate bank accounts, legislation protecting inherited assets. The widow's chest was a specific, culturally rooted solution, but the human need it addressed, the desire for security anchored in one's own labor and foresight, echoes through time. We still seek our own oak fortresses, our own legally shielded stores against life's winters. As the last traces of the museum's spotlight fade from your mind's eye, let the weight settle. Not the weight of oak, but the weight of time, of change, of things lost and transformed. The damp Breton mist of our journey seems to thin, the cottage walls softening into the edges of your own room. The scratch of wool becomes the soft sigh of your blankets. The guttering rushlight dims, replaced by the gentle, steady glow of your nightlight or the faint ambient light from a window. The fierce battles over linens and pots, the desperate strategies against bailiffs and brothers, the rhythmic whir-hum of defiance. They recede, becoming stories woven into the tapestry of a distant past. You've walked with that woman by the hearth, felt the rough grain of her security, witnessed its slow unraveling. It was a hard world, built on pragmatism and profound vulnerability, where independence was measured in sacks of grain and inches of iron-bound oak. Rest now, knowing her fortress, though gone, stood testament to resilience, a heavy, quiet echo of a woman's claim to a future of her own making. Let the silence hold that echo gently. The echoes settle now, like dust motes drifting in a sunbeam long after the trunk has closed. That world of salt-crusted oak and hand-spun hope feels distant, softened by the veil of time and the quiet of your own safe space. Breathe in deeply. Feel the cool air, no damp Breton mist here, just the gentle circulation from your fan, a modern lullaby humming beneath the silence. Notice the weight of your own blankets, soft and yielding, not coarse wool armor against an unrelenting chill. There are no grain sacks to measure, no parchments to defend, no watchful eyes judging your stores. Only stillness. The struggles we witnessed, the scratch of the spindle, the clang of the contested pot, the weary triumph in a smoky courtroom, were battles fought in a different lifetime, on shores washed by a different sea. They linger not as burdens, but as stories folded away like well-worn linens in a chest now resting. You journeyed through that world with clear eyes, acknowledging its harshness, yet also the fierce, ingenious spark it demanded to survive. Honor that. Then release it. Feel the solidity beneath you, not packed earth, but the steady support of your mattress. Listen to the rhythm of your own breath, steady and calm, a quiet counterpoint to the fan's soft whir. Let the images dissolve. The carpenter's yard fades, the marketplace roar softens to a murmur, the courtroom tension evaporates like morning fog. What remains is peace. A deep, encompassing quiet that holds you gently. The widow's story was one of resilience carved from necessity. Your story, here in the soft dark, is simply being. Allowed to rest, to drift, to let go of the weight of centuries and the intricacies of forgotten laws. There is no chest to guard tonight, only the open space of dreams waiting beyond the threshold of wakefulness. So let your muscles soften, one by one. Shoulders sinking, jaw unclenching, fingers relaxing. The past has shared its tale, now it recedes, leaving only the comforting present, the hum of the fan, the sigh of your breath, the soft embrace of darkness. You are safe. You are still. The world outside sleeps. Allow yourself to join it, carried on the quiet tide of this gentle night. Drift now, down, down, into the welcoming arms of deep, dreamless rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.